There we go. Sorry about the delay. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Fraggoth Reads. I should really come up with a proper title. Unless that's okay for everyone. I don't know. Maybe tie it in with the Discord name. Radio Free, whatever. Anyway. Why is that still up? I don't know. Give me a sec. Fascinating. Begone! Banished to the Netherlands! Where was I? Right. So, Endymion, we're going to do some more of. Again. As I've indicated before, the current game plan is basically every stream we do the same book until we're done with the book, and then we move on to the next book, or short story collection, or whatever. That is the game plan. And we'll see if that means we get through more books in a year. Somehow I doubt it. But it does mean there's a bit more continuity. Unfortunately, as before, my schedule for the foreseeable is going to be very, very unstable. Saturdays look semi-locked down, so if that's better for people, great. If it's not better for people, I'm sorry. So previously on, what was the big thing that happened previously on? Let's see. Father Captain Federico de Soya and the gang and his and Gregorius, Key, and Rettig make it to Renaissance Vector with something like a 5-month lead time on Aenea, Raul, and Bettik. And since Renaissance Vector, Aenea's next location, or next destination rather, is basically a pack stronghold, they spend a bunch of that time just getting all the local forces and some reinforcements that show up, including some of de Soya's previous comrades before he was sent on this mission, basically into this grand battle plan in order to abduct Aenea as safely, swiftly, and securely as possible. Aenea does basically another suicide gambit that works. It's another bluff. I'm not actually sure if them using stunners would have taken out the ship and its brain, but it was a chance they could not take. So they allow them to descend into Renaissance Vector's atmosphere, at which point, while Federico de Soya is like, what exactly is their end game here, they make for the Farcaster Portal, and de Soya, realizing at the last moment, oh no, they're going for the Farcasters, basically orders them to slag it. Orders all the orbital ships and everyone else to slag the portal. And there is no evidence of Aenea being left. He goes through a military tribunal, and they're like, well, you couldn't have possibly known. The Farcaster portals have been dead, as far as anyone knows, for the last 250 to 300 years. You're well within your rights to have done it, and you must now continue your mission. And he's like, okay. Because now that they're in the Farcaster network, they could be anywhere of like easily 200 worlds. So he has to, with Gregorius, Key, and Rettig, now take the Archangel class fast courier and just keep bopping between worlds and hope that he encounters them, and getting the word out that, hey, keep an eye out for some people who are going to who might come through here, and hold them and send word. So, kind of like the flip of a switch, we now have a very radical change in the pursuit-pursuer dynamic. Because before, Aenea, Raul, and Bettik were constrained by being slower, ultimately, than Father Captain DeSoya, but now they can travel instantaneously to whatever world they instantly translate to. And that's, unfortunately, well, it's not quite instantaneous because they have to still journey to another Farcaster portal. They can't use the same one they just came through, and you do not know what planet that portal will go to. So it's all very randomized now. As I think Bettik describes it, it's like a deck of cards that's been shuffled. Or the ship. I think it's Bettik that describes it that way. So some of the portals will actually open up on different parts of a same planet. So they might go back to a planet, they don't know. So this kind of opens up the narrative for anything goes now. It is pure adventure time with, a looming pursuit over your head or in front of you. So you still have to be careful. Because a lot of the web worlds were occupied. And being occupied, that means the packs eventually showed up to them. Alright, that I will set aside as my arbitrary stopping point. Actually, I might have to do one that's shorter than that. Let's see how short the chapter that last chapter is. So my time is, unfortunately, more limited than I would like. Let's get there, and then we'll see how we're doing. Where did my other bookmark go? It was here, and now it has vanished from me. It has abandoned me in my time of need. Anyway, that gets us caught up, more or less, except for one detail. So whatever planet that our good friends Aenea, Raul, and Bettik have showed up on now, they are now getting their materials together for the journey ahead, and they have gotten an unexpected guest in the form of the Shrike, who has shown up, last they know, just outside their ship. And with that, we will get rolling. Our hawking mat must have looked like a blur during our wild rush back to the ship. I asked if the ship could send us a real-time holo of the Shrike, but it said that most of its hull sensors were covered with mud and it had no clear view of the beach. "It's on the beach?" I said. "It was a moment ago when I went up to carry another load out," came Bettik's voice. "Then it was in the Hawking Drive accumulator ring," said the ship. "What?" I said. "There's no entrance to that part of the ship." I stopped before I made a total idiot of myself. "Where is it now?" I said. "We are not sure," said Bettik. "I am going to go out onto the hull now, and we'll be taking one of the radios. The ship will relay my voice to you." "Wait," I began. "Endymion," interrupted the android. "Rather than urging you to rush back here, I called to suggest that you and Aenea, extend your sightseeing for a bit until the ship and I receive an indication of our, visitors' intentions." This made sense to me. Here I was, charged with protecting this girl, and when what might well be the deadliest killing machine in the galaxy appears, what do I do but rush her to ward the danger? I was being a bit of an asshole this long day. I reached for the flight threads to slow us and bank back to the east. Aenea's small hand intercepted mine. "No," she said. "We'll go back." I was shaking my head. That thing can go anywhere it pleases," said the girl. Her eyes and tone were deadly serious. "If it wanted me, or you, it would appear right here on the mat with us." The thought made me look around. "Let's go back," said Aenea.
I sighed and turned back upriver, slowing the mat just a bit as I did so. Pulling the plasma rifle from my pack and swinging the stock out to lock it, I said, "I don't get it. Is there any record of that monster ever leaving Hyperion?" "I don't think so," said the girl. She was leaning so that her face was against my back to stay out of the wind blast as the deflection field lessened. "So, what's happening? Is it following you?" "That seems logical." Her voice was muffled as she spoke into the cotton of my shirt. "Why?" I said. Aenea pushed away so strongly that I began to reach for her instinctively to keep her from tumbling off the back of the mat. She shrugged away from my hand. "Raul, I don't really know the answers to these questions yet, all right? I didn't know if the thing would leave Hyperion. I certainly didn't want it to. Believe me." "I do," I said. I lowered my hand to the mat, noticing how large it was next to her small hand, small knee, tiny foot. She set her hand on mine. "Let's get back." "Right." I loaded the rifle with a plasma cartridge magazine. The shell casings were not separate, but were molded into the magazine until each fired. One magazine held 50 plasma bolts. When the last was fired, the magazine was gone. I slammed the magazine up and in with a slap of my hand as I'd been taught in the guard, set the selector to single shot, and made sure the safety was on. I laid the weapon across my knees as we flew. Aenea touched my shoulders with her hands and said in my ear, "Do you think that thing will do any good against the Shrike?" I swiveled my head to look at her. "No," I said. We flew into the setting sun. Bettik was alone on the narrow beach when we arrived. He waved to reassure us that everything was all right. But I still circled once above the treetops before landing. The sun was a red globe balancing on the jungle canopy to the west. I set the mat down next to a pile of crates. I set the mat down next to the pile of crates and equipment on the beach, in the shadow of the great ship's hull, and jumped to my feet, the plasma rifle's safety set to off. "It's still gone," said Bettik. He had radioed this fact to us upon leaving the ship, but I was still tense with expectation. The android led us over to a clear place on the beach where there was a single pair of footprints, if one could call them footprints. It looked as if someone had pressed a very heavy piece of bladed farm equipment into the sand in 2 places. I crouched next to the prints like the experienced tracker I was, then realized the silliness of that exercise. He just appeared here, again in the ship, and then disappeared? "Yes," said Bettik. "Ship, did you ever get the thing on radar or visual?" "Negative," came the reply from the bracelet. "There are no video recorders in the Hawking Drive accumulator." How did you know it was there?" I asked. "I have a mass sensor in every compartment," said the ship. "For flight purposes, I must know precisely how much mass is displaced in every section of the ship." "How much mass did it displace?" I said. 1.063 metric tons, said the ship. I froze in the act of straightening up. "What? Over 1,000 kilos? That's ridiculous!" I looked at the 2 footprints again. "No way!" "Way," said the ship. "During the creature's stay in the Hawking Drive accumulator ring, I measured a precise displacement of 1.063 thousand kilos, and—" "Jesus wept!" I said, turning to Bettik. "I wonder if anyone's ever weighed this bastard before." "The Shrike is almost 3 meters tall," said the android, "and it may be very dense. It may also vary its mass as required." "Required for what?" I muttered, looking at the line of trees. It was very dark under there as the sun set. The gymnosperm feather fronds high above us caught the last of the light and faded. Clouds had rolled in during the last minutes of our flight back, and now they also glowed red and then grew dull as the sunset faded. You ready to get a star fix? I said to the comlog. Quite ready, said the ship, although this cloud cover will have to clear. In the meantime, I've made 1 or 2 other calculations. Such as? Said Aenea. Such as, based upon the movement of this world's sun during the past few hours, this planet's day is 18 hours, 6 minutes, 51 seconds long. Units in old hegemony standard, of course. Of course, I said, to A. Bettik. Any of those River Tethys vacation worlds in your book show an 18-hour day? None that I have come across, Endymion. All right, I said, let's decide about tonight. Do we camp out here, stay in the ship, or load this stuff on the flybikes and get downriver to the next portal as soon as possible? We can haul the inflatable raft with us. I vote we do that. I'm not real keen on staying on this world if the Shrike is around here. A. Bettik raised one finger like a child in a classroom. I should have radioed you earlier, he said as if embarrassed. The EVA locker, as you know, suffered some damage from the attack. There was no sign of an inflatable raft, although the ship remembers one in inventory, and 3 of the 4 bikes are inoperable. I frowned. Totally? Yes, sir, said the android. Quite. The 4th is repairable, the ship thinks, but it will take several days. Shit, I said to no one in particular. How much charge do those bikes have? Asked Aenea. 100 hours under normal use, I piped up my comlog. The girl made a dismissive gesture. I don't think they'd be that useful anyway. 1 bike isn't going to make that much of a difference, and we might never find a recharge source. I rubbed my cheek, feeling the stubble there. In the day's excitement, I had forgotten to shave. I thought of that, I said, but if we take any gear at all, the hawking mat's not big enough to haul the 3 of us, plus weapons, plus what we need to take. I thought that the child would argue with us about needing the gear, but instead she said, Let's take it all, but let's not fly. Not fly? I said. The idea of hacking our way through that jungle made me queasy. Without an inflatable raft, it's either fly or walk. We can still have a raft, said Aenea. We could build a wooden raft and float it downstream, not only on this section of the river, but all of them. I rubbed my cheek again. The waterfall. We can ferry our stuff down there on the hawking mat in the morning, she said. Build the raft below the falls, unless you don't think we can construct a raft. I looked at the gymnosperms, tall, thin, tough, just about the right thickness. We can build a raft, I said. We used to cobble them together on the cans to haul extra junk downstream with the barges. Good, said Aenea. We'll camp here tonight. It shouldn't be too long a night if the day is only 18 standard hours. Then get moving at first light. I hesitated a moment. I didn't want to get into the habit of letting an 11-year-old kid make decisions for us all, but the idea seemed sensible. It's too bad the ship's kaput, I said. We could just go downriver on repulsors. Aenea laughed out loud. I'd never considered going on the River Tethys in this ship, she said, rubbing her nose. It'd be just what we need, inconspicuous as a giant dachshund squeezing under croquet hoops. What's a dachshund? I said. What's a croquet hoop? Asked A. Bettik. Never mind, said Aenea. Do you guys agree about staying here tonight and building a raft tomorrow? I looked at the android. It seems eminently sensible to me. It seems eminently sensible to me, he said, although a subset of an equally eminent nonsensical voyage. I'll take that as a yes vote, said the girl. Raul? All right, I said, but where'd we sleep tonight? Here on the beach or in the ship where it'll be safer? The ship spoke. I will endeavor to make my interior as safe and hospitable as possible tonight, given the circumstances. 2 of the couches on the fugue deck will still serve as beds, and there are hammocks which might be strung. I vote we camp on the beach, said Aenea. The ship's no safer from the Shrike than out here. I looked at the darkening forest. There might be other things we don't want to meet in the dark, I said. The ship seems safer. A. Bettik touched a small crate. I found some small perimeter alarms, he said. We could set those around our camp. I would be happy to stand watch through the night. I confess to some interest in sleeping outside after so many days aboard the ship." I sighed and surrendered. "We'll trade off watches," I said. "Let's get this junk set up before it gets too dark." The junk included the camping gear I'd asked the android to dig out, a tent of micro-thin polymer, thin as the shadow of a spider web, but tough, rainproof, and light enough to carry in one's pocket. The superconductor heating cube, cool on 5 sides and able to heat any meal on the 6th, the perimeter alarms Bettik had mentioned, actually a hunter's version of old military motion detectors, 3-centimeter discs that could be spiked into the ground in any sized perimeter up to 2 clicks, sleeping bags, infinitely compressible foam pads, night goggles, the comm units, mess kits, and utensils. We set the alarms in place first, spiking them down in a half circle from just within the forest's edge to the edge of the river. "What if that big thing crawls out of the river and eats us?" said Aenea as we finished setting the perimeter. It was getting dark in earnest now, but the clouds hid any stars. Breezes rustled the fronds above with a more sinister sound than earlier. If that or anything else crawls out of the river and eats us," I said, "you're going to wish we'd stayed one more night in the ship." I set the last detectors at the river's edge. We pitched the tent in the center of the beach, not far from the bow of the crippled ship. The microfabric did not need tent poles or stakes. All you had to do was double-crease the lines of the fabric you wanted rigid, and those folds would stay taut in a hurricane. But setting a micro-tent up was a bit of an art, and the other two watched while I expanded the fabric, creased the edges into A-line with a dome center tall enough to stand in, and folded the suddenly rigid edges into the sand to stake it. I had left an expanse of microfabric as the floor of the tent, and by stretching it just so, we had mesh for the entrance. Bettik nodded his appreciation for the trick, and Aenea set the sleeping bags in place while I set a pan on the heating cube and opened a can of beef stew. At the last moment I remembered that Aenea was a vegetarian. She had eaten mostly salads during the 2 weeks aboard the ship. "That's all right," she said, poking her head out of the tent. "I'll have some of the bread that Bettik's heating up, and perhaps some of the cheese." Bettik was carrying fallen wood and setting stones into a fire ring. "We don't need that," I said, indicating the heating cube and the bubbling pot of stew. "Yes," said the android, "but I thought a fire might be pleasant, and the light welcome." The light, it turned out, was very welcome. We sat under the awning vestibule of my elaborately folded tent and watched the flames spit sparks toward the sky as a storm moved in. It was a strange storm, with bands of shifting lights in lieu of lightning. The pale bands of shimmering color danced from the bottoms of the hurrying clouds to points just meters above the gymnosperm fronds, gyrating wildly in the rising wind. There was no thunder with the phenomenon, but a sort of subsonic rumble that set my nerves on edge. Within the jungle itself, pale globes of red and yellow phosphorescence jiggled and danced, not gracefully like the radiant gossamers in Hyperion's forests, but nervously, almost malevolently. Behind us, the river lapped at the beach with increasingly active waves. Sitting by the fire, my head set in place and turned... Sitting by the fire, my headset in place and turned to the perimeter detector's... It should be tuned. Yeah, that's what threw me. Sitting by the fire, my headset in place and tuned to the perimeter detector's frequency, the plasma rifle across my lap, the night goggles on my forehead ready to be flipped down at a second's notice, I must have been a comical sight. It did not seem funny at the time. Images of the Shrike's footprints in the sand kept coming to mind. "Did it act threatening?" I'd asked. Did it act threatening? I'd asked Bettik a few minutes earlier. I'd been trying to get him to hold the 16-gauge shotgun. No weapon is easier for a non-weapon user to use than a shotgun, but all he would do was keep it by him as he sat by the fire. "It did not act anything at all," he had replied. It simply stood there on the beach, tall, spiked, dark, but gleaming. Its eyes were very red. Was it looking at you? It was looking east, down the river, Bettik had replied. As if waiting for Aenea and me to return, I had thought. So I sat by the flickering fire, watched the aurora dance and shimmer over the wind-tossed jungle, tracked the will-o'-the-wisps as they jiggled in the jungle darkness, listened to the subsonic thunder rumbling like some great, hungry beast, and passed the time wondering how the hell I'd got myself here. For all I knew, there were velociraptors and packs of carrion breed calidergas. I don't know what that is. Calidurgas, maybe? Calidurgas, yes. That's what it is. It's a reference. Although it's spelled Kalidergas. And I would think if it was pure reference material, it would be Kali Du Urgas. Durgas. Kali Durgas. Anyway, where were we? For all I knew, there were velociraptors and packs of carrion breed calidurgas slinking through the jungle toward us even as we sat, fat and stupid by the fire. Or perhaps the river would rise. A wall of water could be rushing downstream toward us that very moment. Camping on a sand spit was not terribly bright. We should have slept in the ship with the airlock sealed tight. Aenea lay on her stomach looking into the fire. "Do you know any stories?" she said. "Stories?" I cried. Bettik looked up from where he sat, hugging his knees beyond the fire. "Yes," I said the girl, "like ghost stories." I made a noise. Aenea propped her chin on her palms. The fire painted her face in warm tones. "I just thought it might be fun," she said. "I like ghost stories." I thought of 4 or 5 responses and held them back. "You'd better get to sleep," I said at last. "If the ship's right about the short day, we don't have too much night." Please God, let that be true, I was thinking. Aloud, I said, "You'd better get some sleep while you can." "All right," said Aenea, and took one last look across the fire at the wind-tossed jungle, the aurora, and the St. Elmo's fire in the forest, rolled into her sleeping bag, and went to sleep. Bettik and I sat in silence for a while. Occasionally I would converse with my bracelet comlog, asking the ship to inform me immediately if the river started rising, or if it detected some mass displacement, or if... "I would be happy to take the first watch, Endymion," said the android. "Nah, go ahead and sleep," I said, forgetting that the blue-skinned man required very little sleep. "We will watch together, then," he said softly, "but do feel free to doze when you need to, Endymion." Perhaps I did doze off sometime before the tropical dawn, about 6 hours later. It was cloudy and stormy all night. The ship never got its star fix while we were there. No velociraptors or calidurgas ate us. The river did not rise. The storm aurora did not harm us, and the balls of swamp gas never came out of the swamp to burn us. What I remember most about that night, besides my galloping paranoia and terrible tiredness, was the sight of Aenea sleeping with her brown-blonde hair spilled out over the edge of her red sleeping bag, her fist raised to her cheek like an infant preparing to suck its thumb. I realized that night the import and the terrible difficulty in the task ahead of me, of keeping this child safe from the sharp edges of a strange and indifferent universe. I think that it was on this alien and storm-tossed night that I first understood what it might be like to be a parent. We got moving at first light, and I remember that morning mixture of bone-tiredness, gritty eyes, stubbled cheeks, aching back, and sheer joy that I usually felt after my first night on a camping trip. Aenea went down to the river to wash up, and I have to admit that she looked fresher and cleaner than she should have, given the circumstances. Bettik had heated coffee over the cube, and he and I drank some while we watched the morning fog curl up from the quickly moving river. Aenea sipped from a water bottle she'd brought from the ship, and we all munched on dry cereal from a ration pack. By the time the sun was shining over the jungle canopy, burning away the mists that rose from the river and forest, we were ferrying the gear downriver on the hawking mat. Since Aenea and I had done the fun part the previous evening, I let Bettik fly the gear while I dragged more stuff out of the ship and made sure we had what we needed. Clothing was a problem. I had packed everything I thought I might need, but the girl had only the clothes she'd been wearing on Hyperion and carrying in her pack, and a few shirts we'd cut down from the consul's wardrobe. With more than 250 years to think about rescuing the child, one would think that the old poet would have thought to pack some clothes for her. Aenea seemed happy enough with what she had brought, but I was worried that it would not be enough if we ran into cold or rainy weather. The EVA locker was a help there. There were several suit liners fitted out for the spacesuits, and the smallest of these came close to fitting the girl. I knew that the micropore material would keep her warm and dry in any but the most Arctic conditions. I also appropriated a liner for the android and myself. It seemed absurd to be packing for winter in the rising tropical heat of that day, but one never knew. There was also an old outdoors vest of the consul's in the locker, long but fitted with more than a dozen pockets, clips, tie-on rings, secret zippered compartments. Aenea let out a squeal when I dug it out of the tumbled mess of the locker, put it on, and wore it almost constantly from then on. We also found two EVA geology specimen bags with shoulder straps, which made excellent packs. Aenea hoisted one to her shoulder and loaded the extra clothes and bric-a-brac we were finding. I still was convinced that there had to be a raft there, but no amount of digging and opening locker compartments could bring one up. Endymion, said the ship when I mentioned to the child what I was rooting around for. I have a vague memory. Aenea and I stopped what we were doing and listened. There was something strange, almost pained, about the ship's voice. I have a vague memory of the consul taking the inflatable raft, of him waving goodbye to me from it. Where was that? I asked. Which world? I do not know, said the ship in that same bemused, almost pained tone. It may not have been a world at all. I remember stars shining below the river. Below the river? I said. I was worried about the ship's mental integrity after the crash. The memory is fragmented, said the ship in a brisker tone, but I do remember the consul departing in the raft. It was a large raft, quite comfortable for 8 or 10 people. Great, I said, slamming a compartment door. Aenea and I carried out the last load. We had rigged a metal folding ladder to hang down from the airlocks, so climbing in and out was not the struggle it had been earlier. Oh. Hello, Severo. Thanks for tuning in. Have you ever read or heard of the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown? Red Rising is a familiar name, but I might be thinking of something else that's vaguely similar, like a mod for Command & Conquer Generals or something. Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Pierce Brown does not ring a bell. I can all but guarantee I haven't read it. Let me see. I'm always open to suggestion. I don't know how to type. Red Rising. Here we go. 2014 publishing dates. Oh, that actually sounds pretty good. Martian Revolution. Heck yeah. I'll check that out. That looks fun. It has to be pretty, there's not much I won't read on stream. It has to be like an actively bad book. Like, so there's this series called Bio of a Space Tyrant, and I can't remember the author's name. I have them at the back end of a shelf. They were at like a used bookstore, and I was like, oh, cool, it's like a whole series. Let me grab these. And they are aggressively raunchy. And not in like a funny way, but in like a this is kind of creepy and gross way. Those I will probably never read on stream unless I feel like inflicting it on other people, and that's not likely. One I do kind of want to read on stream, though, which has some unfortunate elements in it, is this series by... it's not Stephen Barnes. What's his name? I can't make it out from here. I've talked about it before. But, like, you have to get through the first volume, and the first volume is, like, filled with some horrible, horrible things happening to people who don't necessarily deserve it. Who definitely don't deserve it. But it's like you have to get through the first volume in order to get to the rest of the series, which is a lot less squicky, but well worth your time. Stephen R. Donaldson? Maybe? If I could remember the name of the series, I would tell you. I'll check it after we're done today. Bio of a Space Tyrant I won't read. This other series I'm talking about I would. But with, like, the proviso that this first volume is really, really fucked up. And there will be other fucked up things that happen throughout, but most of it is in the first volume. It's very literally the ring cycle in space. It's very like the, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's Stephen R. Donaldson is the author. I think it's Stephen with a PH. Stephen R. Donaldson. Oh, I can't remember the name. There's lots of ring allusions, but by his own admission, he's like, yeah, I set forth to make the ring cycle in space, and it does it pretty well. Has some interesting gimmicks where it'll do a recap by telling the recap from the perspective of another character, and it won't be perfectly accurate. It'll be like, oh, here's what this character would know, so you recap on a bunch of stuff that they could possibly know or have found out, but it doesn't include why characters have done the things they've done. So it's interesting. It wasn't like... It's good. I thought it was pretty good. It didn't blow my mind, but I was like, this is fun, once you can get past the initial book being full of really horrible torture of a given individual. Where were we? Yeah, and it's well done too. Like, it's a good way to get the reader up to speed. It's also a good way of laying out, hey, here's what this person understands as the status quo. It's kind of like a good way of doing, I guess, almost like a Greek chorus, in a way of being like, here's the state of play as far as this person knows. Here's everything they've learned, and that's why they're about to do the thing they're going to do, because they don't know these things. And it's good about kind of, you know, if you've been reading it, it's like, oh, they don't know that so-and-so just did whatever. It's well done. I felt it was well done. I'll find the name of the series, and I'll double-check the name of the author in like an hour or two when I'm done reading the segment I have set aside here. Where were we? Yes, the raft. Memory is fragmented. Here we go. Great, I said, slamming a compartment door. Aenea and I carried out the last load. We had rigged a metal folding ladder to hang down from the airlock, so climbing in and out was not the struggle it had been earlier. Bettik swooped back after ferrying the camping gear and food cartons down to the waterfall, and now I looked at what remained. My backpack filled with my personal gear, Aenea's backpack and shoulder bag, the extra comm units and goggles, some of the food packs, and, lashed under the top of my pack, the folded plasma rifle and the machete Bettik had found yesterday. The long knife was awkward to carry, even in its leather sheath, but my few minutes in the jungle the day before had convinced me that we might need it. I had also dug out an axe and an even more compact tool, a folding shovel, actually, although for millennia we idiots who had joined the infantry had been trained to call it an entrenching tool. All of our cutlery was beginning to take up space. I would have been happy to have skipped the axe and brought along a cutting laser to fell the trees for the raft. Even an old chainsaw would have been preferable, but my flashlight laser wasn't up to that sort of work, and the weapons locker had been strangely devoid of cutting tools. For one long, self-indulgent moment I considered bringing out the old force assault rifle and just blasting and burning those trees down, splitting them with the pulse bolts if need be, but then I rejected the idea. It would be too loud, too messy, and too imprecise. I would just have to use the axe and sweat a bit. I did bring one of the toolkits with hammer, nails, screwdrivers, screws, pivot bolts, all the things I might need for raft building, as well as some rolls of waterproof plastalum. Sometimes you get jumped with a new word. Admittedly a sci-fi word in this case. I would just have to use the axe and sweat a bit. I did bring one of the toolkits with hammer, nails, screwdrivers, screws, pivot bolts, all the things I might need for raft building, as well as some rolls of waterproof plastalum that I thought might make crude but adequate flooring for the raft. On top of the toolkit were several hundred meters of nylon-sheathed climbing rope in 3 separate coils. In a red waterproof pouch, I'd found some flares and simple plastique, the kind that had been used for blasting stumps and rocks out of fields for countless centuries, as well as a dozen detonators. I included those, although they could be of doubtful use in felling trees for a raft. Also included in this pile for the next trip were 2 medkits and a bottle-sized water purifier. I had carried the EM flying belt out, but the thing was bulky with its harness and power pack. I propped it against my pack anyway, thinking that we might need it. Also propped against my pack was the 16-gauge shotgun, which the android had not bothered taking with him during his flight east. Next to it were 3 boxes of shells. I had also insisted on bringing the flechette pistol, although neither Bettik nor Aenea would carry the thing. On my belt was the holster holding the loaded .45, a pocket for an old-fashioned magnetic compass we'd found in the locker, my folded pair of night goggles and daytime binoculars, a water bottle, and 2 extra clips for the plasma rifle. "Bring on the velociraptors," I muttered while taking inventory. "What?" said Aenea, looking up from her packing. "Nothing." Aenea had her things packed neatly into her new bag by the time Bettik touched down on the sand. She had also packed the android's few personal items in the second shoulder bag. I have always enjoyed breaking camp, even more than setting it up. I think it's the neatness of packing everything away that I enjoy. "What are we forgetting?" I said to the other 2 as we stood there on the narrow beach, looking at the packs and weapons. "Me," said the ship through the comm log on my wrist. The spacecraft's voice did sound a bit plaintive. Aenea walked across the sand to touch the curved metal of the beached ship. "How are you doing?" "I have begun repairs, Aenea," it said. "Thank you for inquiring." "Do you still project 6 months for repairs?" I asked. The last of the clouds were dissipating overhead, and the sky was that pale blue again. The green and white fronds moved against it. "Approximately 6 standard months," said the ship. "That is for my internal and external condition, of course. I do not have the macro manipulators to repair such things as your broken flybikes." That's all right, said Aenea. We're leaving them all behind. We'll fix them when we'll fix them when we see you again. When will that be? Said the ship. Its voice seemed smaller than usual coming from the comlog. The child looked at Bettik and me. None of us spoke. Finally, Aenea said, We will need your services again, ship. Can you conceal yourself here for months or years while you repair yourself and wait? Yes, said the ship. Would the river bottom do? I looked out at the grey mass of the ship rising from the water. The river was wide here and probably deep, but the thought of the wounded ship backing itself into it seemed strange. Won't you leak? I said. Endymion, said the ship, in that tone which made me think it was acting haughty. I am an interstellar spacecraft capable of penetrating nebulae and existing quite comfortably within the outer shell of a red giant star. I shall hardly, as you put it, leak because of being immersed in H2O for a brief period of years. Sorry, I said, and then, refusing to have the ship's rebuke as the last word, Don't forget to close your airlock when you go under. The ship did not comment. Torture involving a disembodied head. Actually, maybe. Or at least the ability to paralyze someone's muscles and make it so that they can't move. And then, doing whatever they wanted to them in the meantime. I think even cutting off their pain as well. It was nasty, at any rate. Sorry. It was pretty unpleasant. Also probably some rape. If memory serves. It was pretty grody. It's been a while since I've read that. I'd have to probably reread it and then, have another think on, would this be appropriate? Would this get me deplatformed? Because it's all clearly portrayed as absolutely frigging horrible. The intent is that this is very bad and the person doing it to the other person is a bad person. Doing it for bad reasons because they're bad. Something about a chip surgically inserted in their spine or something. I can't remember now. It's been a minute. So it's not done as a, hey, this is glorifying horrible things. It's not. It's absolutely intended to be it's graphic shock factor. But it is intended to be this is bad. This signifies the person is bad. And anything that happens to this person after this point is fair fucking game. And oh boy, is karma gonna be a bitch. And it is. Though it takes a minute. Here we go. When we come back for you, said the girl, will we be able to call you? Use the comlog bands on 90.1 on the general radio band, said the ship. I will keep a buggy whip antenna above the waterline to receive your call. Buggy whip antenna, mused Bettik. What a lovely phrase. I am sorry that I do not recall the derivation of that term, said the ship. My memory is not what it used to be. That's all right, said Aenea, patting the hull. You've served us well. Now you get well. We want you in top shape when we return. Yes, Aenea. I will be in contact and monitoring your progress until you transit the next Farcaster Portal. Bettik and Aenea sat on the hawking mat with their packs and our last boxes of gear taking up the rest of the space. I strapped the bulky flying belt on. It meant that I had to carry my own pack against my chest with a strap looped over my shoulder, the rifle in my free hand, but it worked all right. I knew how to operate the thing only from books. EM belts were useless on Hyperion, but the controls were simple and intuitive. The power indicator showed full charge, so I did not anticipate being dropped into the river for this short hop. In my mind, I envision... I don't know if anyone's ever here has ever... or anyone listening, has ever seen the old pulp serial series, King of the Rocket Men. I don't remember the time frame. Probably the 30s or 40s. Probably the 40s. Maybe 50s? An old black and white TV serial series called King of the Rocket Men, and I'll never forget watching it with my mother many years ago, and I hesitate to call her a Luddite, because she's not. Also, there's a whole explanation of the baggage of that term that I don't want to get into. Anyway, in the colloquial definition of Luddite being anti-fancy technology stuff, she prefers things simplistic. But the controls on that belt were very simple. It was on, off, up, down, and I think like some sort of a speed dial. Very simple. So I kind of envisioned something like that for this, except without the rocket pack. If you've ever seen them, I can't believe it's a Disney movie, but it's a Disney movie from the 90s, Rocketeer, or The Rocketeer. That's very much cribbing, or homaging, I should say, stuff like King of the Rocket Men. Two-fisted scientist builds rocket pack and fights crime. It's good stuff. Very classic pulpy stuff. Kind of like, I get similar time period as actually it might be a bit older than The Shadow. What evil lurks in, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? No. What evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. Good times, man. Good times. I have to stop interrupting myself. It makes this take longer. Here we go. The mat was hovering about 10 meters above the river when I squeezed the handheld controller, lurched into the air, almost clipped a gymnosperm, found my balance, and flew out to hover next to them. Hanging from this padded body harness was not as comfortable as sitting on a flying carpet, but the exhilaration of flying was even stronger. With the controller still held in my fist, I gave them the thumbs up, and we flew east along the river toward the rising sun. There weren't many other sand pits or beaches between the ship and the waterfall, but there was a good spot just below the waterfall, along the south side of the river, where it widened into a lazy pool just beyond the rapids, and it was here that Bettik unloaded our camping gear and the first load of material. The noise from the falls was loud as we stacked the last of the small crates. I unlimbered the axe and looked at the nearest gymnosperms. "I was thinking," Bettik said so softly that I could hardly hear him over the noise of the waterfall. I paused with the axe on my shoulder. The sunlight was very hot, and my shirt was already sticking to me. "The River Tethys was meant to be a pleasure cruise," he continued. "I wonder how the pleasure cruisers dealt with that." I wonder how the pleasure cruisers dealt with that. He pointed a blue finger at the roaring falls. "I know," said Aenea. "I was thinking the same thing. They had levitation barges then, but not everyone going down the Tethys would have been in one. It would have been embarrassing to go for a romantic boat ride and find yourself and your sweetheart going over those." I stood looking at the rainbow-dappled spray of the falls and found myself wondering if I was as intelligent as I often assumed. This had not occurred to me. "The Tethys has been unused for almost 3 standard centuries," I said. "Maybe the falls are new." "Perhaps," said Bettik. But I doubt it. These falls appear to have been formed by tectonic shelving that runs for many miles north and south through the jungle. Do you see the difference in elevation there? And they have been eroding for a very long time. Note the size of the boulders in the rapids. I would think that this has been here for as long as the river has run. And it's not in your Tethys guidebook? I said. No, said the android, holding the book out. Aenea took it. Maybe we're not on the Tethys, I said. Both of the others stared at me. The ship didn't get a star sighting, I went on, but what if this is some world not on the original Tethys tour? I really hope I'm pronouncing Tethys correctly. Tethys. It's a Greek mythological reference. It's one of the underworld rivers. I think. Styx? No, shoot. I don't remember what the mythological Tethys is. It's probably something like Titus. And not Tethys. But we're going to keep calling it Tethys until someone corrects me. If someone knows, please correct me. It is important that you do so. Sooner rather than later, please. Aenea nodded. I thought of that. The portals are the same as the ones along the remnants of the Tethys today, but who is to say that the Technocore did not have other portals, other Farcaster-connected rivers? I set the head of the axe down and leaned on the shaft. In which case, we're in trouble, I said. You'll never find your architect, and we'll never find our way back to the ship and home. Aenea smiled. It's too early to worry about that. It has been 3 centuries. Maybe the river here just cut a new channel since the Tethys days. Or maybe there's a canal and locks we missed because the jungle grew over it. We don't have to worry about this now. We just have to get downriver to see if there's another portal. I held up one finger. Another thought, I said, feeling a bit smarter than I had a moment before. What if we go to all this trouble of building a raft here and find another waterfall between us and the portal? Or 10 more. We didn't spot the Farcaster Arch last night, so we don't know how far it is. I thought of that, said Aenea. I tapped my fingers on the axe handle. If that kid said that phrase one more time, I would seriously consider using the implement on her. Aenea asked me to reconnoiter, said the android. I did so during my last shuttle here. I was frowning. Reconnoiter? You didn't have time to fly that mat 100 clicks or more downriver. No, agreed the android, but I flew the mat very high and used the extra set of binoculars to search our path. The river appears to run straight and true for almost 200 kilometers. It was difficult to be sure, but I saw what may be the arch, approximately 130 kilometers downriver. There appeared to be no waterfalls or other major obstacles between us and it. My frown must have deepened. You saw all that? I said. How high were you? The mat has no altimeter, said Bettik, but judging from the visible curvature of the planet and the darkening of the sky, I think that I was about 100 kilometers up. Did you have one of the spacesuits on? I asked. At that altitude, a human being's blood would boil in his veins and his lungs would burst from explosive decompression. A respirator? I looked around, but nothing like that was lying in our modest pile of goods. No, said the android, turning to lift a crate. I just held my breath. Shaking my head, I went off to cut some trees down. I figured that the exercise and solitude would do me some good. Tethys? Okay. I will adjust accordingly, thank you. It was evening before the raft was finished, and I would have been working all night if Bettik had not taken turns with me on the tree cutting. The finished product was not beautiful, but it floated. Our little raft was about 6 meters long and 4 wide, with a long steering pole carved into a crude rudder set into a forked support at the rear. Set onto a forked support at the rear, a raised area just in front of the steering pole where Aenea molded the tent into a lean-to with openings front and rear, and crude oarlocks on each side with long oar poles that would lie along the sides of the ship unless they were needed for rowing in dead water or emergency steering in rapids. I had been worried that the fern trees might soak up too much water and sink too low to be useful as a raft. But with only 2 layers of them wrapped together into a honeycomb with our climbing rope and bolted in strategic places, the logs rode very nicely and kept the top of the raft about 15 centimeters above the water. Aenea had shown a fascination with the micro-tent, and I had to admit that her sculpting of it was more skillful and efficient than anything I had shaped in all my years of using the things. Our lean-to could be ducked into from the steering position at the rudder, had a nice overhang in front to shield us from the sun or rain while keeping the view intact, and had nice vestibules on either side to keep the extra crates of gear dry. She had already spread our foam pads and sleeping bags in various corners of the tent. The high sitting area in the center, where we had the best view, forward now... let me try that again. I got lost in the sauce. She had already spread our foam pads and sleeping bags in various corners of the tent. The high sitting area in the center, where we had the best view forward, now boasted a meter-wide river stone, which she had set there as a hearth with the mess gear and heating cube on it. One of the hand lamps was open to lantern mode and was hanging from the center loop, and, I had to admit, the overall effect was cozy. The girl did not just spend her afternoon making cozy tents, however. I guess that I had expected her to stand by and watch while the 2 men sweated through the heavy work. I had stripped to the waist an hour into the heat of the day, but Aenea joined in almost immediately, dragging downed logs to the assembly point, lashing them, driving nails, setting bolts and pivot joints in place, and generally helping in the design. She pointed out why the standard way I'd been taught to jerry-rig a rudder was inefficient, and by moving the base of the support tripod lower and farther apart, I was able to move the long pole easier and to better effect. Twice she showed me different ways to tie the cross supports on the underside of the raft so that they would be tighter and sturdier. When we needed a log shaped, it was Aenea who set to with the machete, and all Bettik and I could do was stand back or be hit with flying chips. Still, even with the 3 of us working hard, it was almost sundown before the raft was finished and our gear loaded. "We could camp here tonight, get onto the river early in the morning," I said. Even as I said it, I knew that I did not want to do that. Neither did the other 2. We climbed aboard, and I pushed us away from the shore with the long pole I'd chosen as our main source of locomotion when the current failed. Bettik I just added a comma there that didn't need to be there. We climbed aboard, and I pushed us away from the shore with the long pole I'd chosen as our main source of locomotion when the current failed. Bettik steered, and Aenea stood near the front of the raft, looking for shoals or hidden rocks. For the first hour or so, the voyage seemed almost magical. After the sultry jungle heat and the tremendous exertion all day, it seemed like paradise to stand on the slowly moving raft, push against the river mud occasionally, and watch the darkening walls of jungle slip past. The sun set almost directly behind us, and for a few minutes the river was as red as molten lava, the undersides of the gymnosperms on either side aflame with reflected light. Then the grayness turned to darkness, and before we caught more than a glimpse of the night sky, the clouds moved in from the east just as they had the previous night. "I wonder if the ship got a fix," said Aenea. "Let's call and ask," I said. The ship had not been able to fix its position. "I was able to ascertain that we are not on Hyperion or Renaissance Vector," said the small voice from my wrist comlog. "Well, that's a relief," I said. "Any other news?" "I have fixed my position on the river bottom," said the ship. "It is quite comfortable, and I am preparing to—" Suddenly, the colored lightning rippled across the northern and western horizons. The wind whipped across the river so strongly that each of us had to rush to keep things from being blown away. The raft began moving toward the south shore with the whitecaps, and the comlog spit static. I thumbed the bracelet off and concentrated on poling while Bettik steered again. For several minutes I was afraid that the raft would come apart in the high waves and roaring wind. The bow was chopping, lifting, and dropping, and our only illumination came from the explosions of magenta and crimson lightning. The thunder was audible this night, great, pealing waves of sound as if someone were rolling giant steel drums down some stairs at us, and the aurora lightning tore at the sky rather than danced as it had the night before. Each of us froze for a second as one of those magenta bolts struck a gymnosperm on the north bank of the river, instantly causing the tree to explode in flame and colored sparks. As an ex-bargeman, I cursed my stupidity for letting us be out here in the middle of such a wide river. The Tethys had opened up to the better part of a click wide again, without lightning rod or rubber mats. We hunkered down and grimaced when the colored bolts struck either shore or lit the eastern horizon in front of us. Suddenly it was raining, and the worst of the lightning was over. We ran for the tent Aenea and Bettik. What? There's no period there. I feel like there should be a some sort of a punctuation mark there. Suddenly it was raining, and the worst of the lightning was over. We ran for the tent. And then it just goes right on. No comma, no period. We ran for the tent. Aenea and Bettik crouched near the front opening, still hunting for sandbanks or floating logs, me standing at the rear where the girl had rigged the tent to provide the person at the rudder shelter even while steering. Something mangled there. It had rained hard and often on the Khan's River when I was a bargeman. I remember huddling in the leaky old barge forecastle and wondering if the damned boat was going to go down just because of the weight of the rain on it, but I do not remember any rain like this one. For a moment I thought that we had come up against another waterfall, a much larger one this time, and had unwittingly poled under the full force of it. But we were still moving downriver, and it was no waterfall descending on us, just the terrible force of the worst rainstorm I had ever experienced. The wise course would have been to make for the riverbank and hold up until the deluge passed, but we could see nothing except colored lightning exploding behind this vertical wall of water, and I had no idea how far the banks were, or whether they held any chance of our landing and tying up. So I lashed the rudder in its highest position so that it would do little but keep our stern to the rear, abandoned my post, and huddled with the child and android as the heavens opened and dropped rivers, lakes, oceans of water on us. It says something about the girl's ability or luck in shaping and securing the tent that not once did it begin to fold or come loose from its cinchings to the raft. I say that I huddled with them, but in truth all three of us were busy holding down crates that had already been lashed in place as that raft pitched, tossed, swung around, and then brought its nose back around yet again. We had no idea which direction we were headed, whether the raft was safe in the middle of the river or was bearing down on boulders in rapids, or was tearing hell-bent for cliffs as the river turned and we did not. Not one of us cared at that point. Our goal was to keep our gear together, not be washed overboard, and to keep track of the other two as best we could. At one point, with one arm around our stack of backpacks and my other hand clenched on the girl's collar as she leaned out to retrieve some cookware headed out of the tent at high speed, I looked out from under our vestibule awning toward the front of the raft and realized that every part of the raft except for our little raised platform where the tent sat was under water. The wind whipped whitecaps that glowed red or bright yellow, depending on the color of the curtain. Oh my gosh, I got lost. My apologies. Some of his sentences in this book are particularly long, and for some reason my brain is struggling. I think part of it's that the edition I have has slightly larger pages. It's an omnibus edition. I mean, that might be throwing me. Or I'm just getting old and my reading ability is somehow getting worse, which would be really bad and terrible timing. Let's try this again. The wind whipped whitecaps that glowed red or bright yellow, depending upon the color of the curtain of the lightning aurora raging at that moment. I remembered something I had forgotten to search for in the ship. Life vests, personal notation devices. Surely you mean flotation. Flotation, not notation. What? Proofreading and editing is lost art? Question mark? It's not as bad as Armor, where like whole page sections were repeated. So it's just like, I don't know, some letters get conflated. Pulling Aenea back under the flapping cover of the tent, I screamed against the storm, "Can you swim when it's not zero-G?" What? I could see her lips form the word, but I could not actually hear it. "Can you swim?" Bettik looked up from his position among the pitching crates. Water blew from his bald head and long nose. His blue eyes looked violet when the aurora crashed. Aenea shook her head, although I was unsure whether she was answering my question in the negative or signifying she could not hear. I pulled her closer. Her many-pocketed vest was soaked through and flapping like a wet sheet in a windstorm. "Can you swim?" I was screaming literally at the top of my lungs. The effort took my breath away. I made frenzied swimming motions with both hands cupped in front of me. The raft pitched us apart, then tossed us back into close proximity. I saw understanding light her dark eyes. The rain or spray whipped from the long strands of her hair. She smiled, the spray making her teeth look wet, and leaned closer to shout back into my ear, "Thanks! I'd like to take a swim, but maybe later." We must have hit an eddy then, or perhaps the rising wind just caught the tent and used it as a sail to spin the raft on its axis, but that was when the raft went all the way around, seemed to hesitate, and then continued its spin. The three of us gave up trying to hold on to anything other than our lives and each other and just huddled together in the center of the raft platform. I realized that Aenea was shouting, a sort of happy "Yee-haw!" And before I could scream at her to shut up, I echoed the cry. It felt good to scream against that spinning and the storm and the deluge, unable to be heard, but feeling your own shouts echoing in your skull and bones, even as the thunder rumble echoed there as well. I looked to my right as a crimson bolt illuminated the entire river, saw a boulder sticking up at least 5 meters above the water, and the raft twisting around and past like a dreidel spinning by a cinder, and was more amazed by the sight of Bettik on his knees, his head thrown back, yee-hawing with us at the top of his android lungs. The storm lasted all night. Toward the dawn, the rain let up until it was a mere downpour. The aurora lightning and sonic boom thunder must have ended about then, but I cannot be certain of that. I was, as were both my young friend and my android friend, fast asleep and snoring. Apparently she's like the Greek mother of all bodies of water. Oh, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense in the sense. Severo says, I've been meaning to ask you this, but do you think that there has been a decrease in spell-checking quality in recent books in general, but science fiction particularly? I think I've been noticing that there has been a decrease in grammar quality in recent novels in general, but also in science fiction. So part of it, so there's definitely like an array from like 10 to 15 years ago, within the last 10, 15 years, where sometimes there's like a dire lack of proofreading. And that's kind of what happened here, even though Dan Simmons is a language master. He's very good at what he does. For whatever reason, the way that the text was imported, and this was published when the original books were published in 96 and 97. This omnibus edition I'm reading from, which might have errors that are not present in other editions, this omnibus edition was published in 2005. And I remember there's a couple books, published editions of books from like the mid-aughts to like the aught teens that I know I've seen a bunch of, upon rereads, a bunch of weird grammatical errors that I know aren't from the author or are probably not from the author. In this book's case, I think it's the way that the text is imported to what, using whatever software. It might be something that eyeballs it and is like, oh, well, like the one about notation devices, an N sort of looks like, depending on the text the font you're using, rather, could look like an FL, if for some reason it just missed that. Or it could just be human error in transcribing. I'm not sure. So I've read through four books published in like the last 3 years. I don't remember when Red Noise was published. Red Noise, Alien Clay, a now book named Flux, and what was the other one I read? That's also quite recent. Mountain in the Sea. And I can't remember there being a tremendous amount of grammatical weirdness in those. But I will also say that reading things aloud and reading things in your head, for me at least, is a radically different experience. I think you're using fairly different parts of your brain, partly because when you're reading it aloud, you're having to funnel that information. So, like, at least for me, when I'm reading a book, and I think this probably happens with more people than just me, I believe the brain is filling in a lot of details. It's kind of like how the visual cortex works in general. Like, everything you see is kind of bullshit. it's kind of a lie. Like, if you move your eyes, like, anything you're seeing or think you're seeing, you're not actually seeing because the actual optical organ can't be receiving that information. It's just your brain saying, this is what I'm seeing. It's taking its next best guess. It's taking its best guess, there we go, due to the programming of the human brain. And I think something similar to that happens when reading. Alternatively, I'm just a very bad reader, or have become a very bad reader. Or I'm becoming a more analytical reader as I go because of these reading aloud excursions. Suffice it to say, I can't say I've noticed stuff from like the last couple years being substantially worse. But a lot of what I'm reading, other than like the 4 books I mentioned, has been older material. And some of that has also got baffling issues in it. Armor being a big one. I did not remember, and I'd read that book like 3 or 4 times, that very edition, like 3 or 4 times. I did not remember the weird, let's repeat like a quarter of a page twice stuff that happened in that. That was very strange. I thought I was having like a Mandela effect moment, or Berenstain versus Stein Bears effect moment there. I thought I was losing my mind. I had a point, and I lost it. Oh, here we go. In my neuroscience course, we showed how the angle of approach of a baseball prohibits batters from tracking the ball, so they basically guess when they swing. The ball is literally just too fast to keep your eye on the ball. Yes. Which is actually a cool... it's one of the things that I think often goes unmentioned or would be interesting to focus on the aspect of in like high-speed space combat. Like, when you're dealing with something that moves, and a bunch of books do deal with this pretty effectively. When you're dealing with things that can move at appreciable fractions of the speed of light, like, any data you have on the location of an object starts going to hell in a handbasket, unless you've got, like, magical super observation equipment. So if something's moving at a certain speed, you're not going to know where it is until after it's moved. So predicting where it is becomes pretty difficult. So I can imagine that with a baseball on a smaller scale, that would be very true. Now, mind you, we can get very good at making those predictions. We've got a phenomenal capacity for pattern matching. So phenomenal that we find patterns where they don't exist, which I've always found really interesting. We're able to make order out of chaos pretty effectively. It's a very interesting evolutionary adaptation. Where were we? Oh, yes, we were at the resumation point here. We awoke to find the sun already high, no sign of clouds, the river wide and smooth and slow, the jungle moving by on either side like a seamless tapestry being unwound past us, and the sky gentle and blue. For a while we could only sit in the sunlight, our elbows on our knees, our clothes still wet and dripping. We said nothing. I think the maelstrom of the night was still in our eyes, the blasts of color still popping in our retinas. After a while, Aenea stood up on wobbly legs. The surface of the raft was wet, but still above water. One log on the starboard side had broken free. There were a few tattered cords where knots should be, but all in all, our vessel was still seaworthy. River-worthy. Whatever. We checked fittings and took inventory for a while. The hand lamp we had hung as a lantern was gone, as was one of the smaller cartons of rations, but everything else seemed in place. "Well, you two can stand around," said Aenea. "I'm going to make some breakfast." She turned the heating cube to maximum, had water boiling in a kettle within a minute, poured water for her tea and set it in the coffee pot for our coffee, and then shifted that aside to set a skillet frying with breakfast strips of jambon, with tiny slices of potato she was cutting up. I looked at the ham sizzling and said, "I thought you were a vegetarian." "I am," said the girl. "I'm having wheat chips and some of that terrible reconstituted milk from the ship, but for this one and only time, I'm chef, and you fellows are eating well." We ate well, sitting on the front edge of the tent platform where the sun could bathe our skins and dry our clothes. I don't know why I emphasized that sentence that way. That was interesting. We ate well, sitting on the front edge of the tent platform where the sun could bathe our skins and dry our clothes. I pulled the crushed tricorn cap from one pocket of my wet vest, squeezed water out of it, and set it on my head for some shade. This started Aenea laughing again. I glanced over at Bettik, but the android was as observant and impassive as ever, as if his hour of yee-hawing with us had never occurred. Bettik pulled a pole upright from the front of the raft, on the front of the raft. I had rigged it to swivel so we might hang a lantern there at night, but he pulled off his tattered white shirt and hung it there to dry instead. The sun glinted on his perfect blue skin. "A flag!" cried Aenea. "It's what this expedition has been needing." I laughed. "Not a white flag, though. That stands for—" I stopped in mid-sentence. We had moved slowly with the current around a wide bend in the river. Now we each saw the huge and ancient Farcaster Portal arching for hundreds of meters above and to either side of us. Entire trees had grown on its wide back. Vines fell many meters from its designs and indentations. Each of us moved to our stations, me at the rudder this time, Bettik standing at the long pole as if ready to ward off rocks or borders, and Aenea crouching at the front. For a long moment I knew that this Farcaster was a dud, that it would not work. I could see the familiar jungle and blue sky under it, watch the river go on beyond it. The view was normal right up to the point where we reached the shadow of the giant arch. I could see a fish jump from the water 10 meters in front of us. The wind ruffled Aenea's hair and teased waves from the river. Above us, tons of ancient metal hung there like a child's effort at drawing a bridge. "Nothing happened," I began. The air filled with electricity in a manner more sudden and more terrifying than last night's storm. It was as if a giant curtain had fallen from the arch directly onto our heads. I fell to one knee, feeling the weight and then the weightlessness of it. For an instant too short to measure, I felt as I had when the crash field had exploded around us in the tumbling spacecraft, like a fetus struggling against a clinging amniotic sac. Then we were through. The sun was gone. The daylight was gone. The riverbanks and jungle were no longer there. Water stretched to the horizon on all sides. Stars in number and magnitude I had never imagined, much less observed, filled a sky that seemed too large. Directly ahead of us, silhouetting Aenea like orange searchlights, rose 3 moons, each one the size of a full-fledged planet. "31. Fascinating," said Bettik. It would not have been my choice of words, but it sufficed for the time being. My first reaction was to begin cataloguing our situation in negatives. We were not on the jungle world any longer. We were not on a river. The ocean stretched to the night sky in each direction. We were no longer in daylight. We were not sinking. The raft rode quite differently in these gentle but serious ocean swells, but my bargeman's eye noted that while the waves tended to lap over the edges a bit more, the gymnosperm wood seemed even more buoyant here. I went to one knee near the rudder and gingerly lifted a palmful of sea to my mouth. I spat it out quickly and rinsed my mouth with fresh water from the canteen on my belt. This seawater was far more saline than even Hyperion's undrinkable oceans. "Wow," Aenea said softly to herself. I guessed that she was talking about the rising moons. All 3 were huge and orange, but the center one was so large that even half of its diameter as it rose... Wow, okay. All 3 were huge and orange, but the center one was so large that even half of its diameter as it rose seemed to fill what I still thought of as the eastern sky. Aenea rose to her feet, and her standing silhouette still came less than halfway up to the giant orange hemisphere. Still came less than halfway up, not up to. Aenea rose to her feet, and her standing silhouette still came less than halfway up the giant orange hemisphere. I lashed the rudder in place and joined the other 2 at the front of the raft. Because of the rocking as the gentle ocean swells rolled under us, all 3 of us were holding on to the upright post there, which still held Bettik's shirt flapping in the night wind. The shirt glowed whitely in the moonlight and starlight. I quit being a bargeman for a moment and scanned the sky with a shepherd's eyes. The constellations that had been my favorites as a child, the Swan, the Geyser, the Twin Sisters, Seed Ships, and Home Plate, were not there or were so distorted that I could not recognize them. But the Milky Way was there. The meandering highway of our galaxy was visible from the wave-chopped horizon behind us until it faded in the glow around the rising moons. Normally, stars were much fainter, with even an old Earth-standard moon in the sky, much less these giants. I guessed that a dustless sky, no competing light sources of any sort, and thinner air offered this incredible show. I had trouble imagining the stars here on a moonless night. Where is here? I wondered. I had a hunch. Ship? I said to my comlog. Are you still there? I was surprised when the bracelet answered. The downloaded sections are still here, Endymion. May I help you? The other two tore their gazes away from the rising moon giant and looked at the comlog. You're not the ship? I said. I mean, if you mean, are you in direct communication with the ship? No, said the comlog. The comm bands were severed when you transited the last Farcaster Portal. This abbreviated version of the ship is, however, receiving video feed. I had forgotten that the comlog had light-sensitive pickups. Can you tell us where we are? I said. 1 minute, please, said the comlog. If you will hold the comlog up a bit. Thank you. I will do a sky search and match it to navigational coordinates. While the comlog was searching, Bettik said, I think I know where we are, Endymion. I thought I did as well, but I let the android speak. This seems to fit the description of Mare Infinitus, he said. One of the old worlds in the web and now part of the Pax. Aenea said nothing. She was still watching the rising moon, and her expression was rapt. I looked up at the orange sphere dominating the sky and realized that I could see rust-colored clouds moving above the dusty surface. Looking again, I realized that surface features were visible. Brown blemishes that might be volcano flows, a long scar of a valley with tributaries, the hint of ice fields at the North Pole, and indefinable radiation lines connecting what might be mountain ranges. It looked a bit like hollows I'd seen of Mars, before it had been terraformed, in old Earth's system. Mare Infinitus appears to have 3 moons, Bettik was saying, although in reality it is Mare Infinitus which is the satellite of a near Jovian-sized rocky world. I gestured toward the dusty moon. Like that? Precisely like that, said the android. I have seen pictures. It is uninhabited, but was heavily mined by robots during the hegemony. I think it's Mare Infinitus as well, I said. I've heard some of my off-world Pax hunters talk about it. Great deep-sea fishing. They say that there's some sort of antennaed cephalocordate thing in the ocean on Mare Infinitus that grows to be more than 100 meters long. It swallows fishing ships whole unless it's caught first. I shut up then. All 3 of us peered down into the wine-dark waters. Into the silence suddenly chirped my comlog. I've got it! The star fields match perfectly with my navigational databanks. You are on a satellite surrounding a sub-Jovian world orbiting star 70 Ophiuchi A. Ophiuchus. Yes, it's a... I think that's the serpent. I've got it! The star fields match perfectly with my navigational databanks. You are on a satellite surrounding a sub-Jovian world orbiting star 70 Ophiuchi A, 27.9 light-years from Hyperion, 16.4082 light-years from Old Earth system. The system is a binary, with 70 Ophiuchi A, your primary star, at 6.4 AU, and 70 Ophiuchi B, your secondary, at 89 AU. 89 AU. Since you appear to have atmosphere and water there, it would be safe to say that you are on the second moon from sub-Jovian DB 70 Ophiuchi A prime, known in hegemony days as Mare Infinitus. Thanks, I said to the comlog. I have more astral navigation data, chirped the bracelet. Later, I said, and tapped the comlog off. Bettik removed his shirt from the makeshift mast and pulled it on. The ocean breeze was strong, the air thin and chilly. I pulled my insulated overvest from my pack, and the other two retrieved jackets from their own packs. The incredible moon continued rising into the unbelievable starry sky. The Mare Infinitus segment of the river is a pleasant, if brief, interlude between more recreation-oriented river passages, read the Traveler's Guide to the Web. The three of us crouched by the stone hearth to read the page by the light of our last hand-lamp lantern. The lamp was redundant, actually, since the moonlight was almost as bright as a cloudy day on Hyperion. The violet articulated seas are caused by a form of phytoplankton, not photoplankton. They like to take pictures. They like to watch. The violet articulated seas are caused by a form of phytoplankton in the water, and are not a result of the atmospheric scattering which grants the traveler such lovely sunsets. While the Mare Infinitus interlude is very short, 5 kilometers of such ocean travel is enough for most of the river's wanderers, it does include the web-famous's Gus's Oceanic Aquarium and Grill. Be sure to order the grilled sea giant, the hectopus soup, and the excellent yellowweed wine. Dine on one of the many terraces on Gus's oceanic platform so that you can enjoy one of Mare Infinitus's exquisite sunsets, and even more exquisite moonrises. While this world is noted for its empty ocean expanses, it has no continents or islands, and aggressive sea life, the lantern-mouthed leviathan, for example, please be assured that your Tethys traveler's ship will stay safely within the mid-littoral stream from portal to portal, and be escorted by several Mare Protectorate outrider ships, all so that your brief aquatic intervals, set off by a fine dinner at Gus's Oceanic Grill, will leave only pleasant memories. Note, the Mare Infinitus segment of the Tethys will be omitted from the tour if inclement weather or dangerous sea life conditions prevail. Be prepared to catch this world on a later tour. That was all. I gave the book back to Bettik, turned the lamp off, went to the front of the raft, and scanned the horizon with night vision amplifiers. The goggles were not necessary in the brilliant light from through the... The goggles were not necessary in the brilliant light from the 3 moons. The book lies, I said. We can see at least 25 clicks to the horizon. There's no other portal. Perhaps it moved, said Bettik. Or sank, said Aenea. Ha ha, I said, tossing the goggles into my pack and sitting with the others near the glowing heating cube. The air was cold. It is possible, said the android, that, as with the other river segments, there is a longer and shorter version of this section. Why do we always get the longer versions? I said. We were cooking breakfast, each of us starved after the long night's storm on the river, although the toast, cereal, and coffee seemed more like a midnight snack on the moonlit sea. We soon got used to the pitching and rolling of the raft on the large swells, and none of us showed any signs of seasickness. After my second cup of coffee, I felt better about it all. Something about the guidebook entry had piqued my sense of the absurd. I had to admit, though, that I didn't like the lantern-mouthed leviathan bit. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Aenea said to me as we sat in front of the tent. Bettik was behind us, at the steering rudder. "Yeah," I said. "I guess I am." "Why?" said the girl. I raised my hands. "It's an adventure," I said, "but no one's got hurt." "I think we came close in that storm," said Aenea. "Yes, well, why else do you like it?" There was real curiosity in the child's voice. "I've always liked the outdoors," I said truthfully. "Camping, being away from things. Something about nature makes me feel, I don't know, connected to something larger." I stopped before I began sounding like an orthodox Zen Gnostic. The girl leaned closer. "My father wrote a poem about that idea," she said. Actually, it was the ancient pre-Hegira poet my father's hybrid was cloned from, of course, but my father's sensibilities were in the poem. Before I could ask a question, she continued, He wasn't a philosopher. He was young, younger than you even, and his philosophical vocabulary was fairly primitive. But in this poem he tried to articulate the stages by which we approach fusion with the universe. In a letter he called these stages a kind of pleasure thermometer. I admit that I was surprised and a little taken aback by this short speech. I hadn't heard Aenea talk this seriously about anything yet, or use such large words, and the pleasure thermometer part sounded vaguely dirty to me. But I listened as she went on. Father thought that the first stage of human happiness was a fellowship with essence, she said softly. I could see that A. Bettik was listening from his place at the steering pole. By that, she said, Father meant an imaginative and sensuous response to nature, just the sort of feeling you were describing earlier. I rubbed my cheek, feeling the longer bristles there. A few more days without shaving and I would have a beard. I sipped my coffee. Father included poetry and music and art as part of that response to nature, she said. It's a fallible but human way of resonating to the universe. Nature creates that energy of creation in us. For Father, imagination and truth were the same thing. He once wrote, The imagination may be compared to Adam's dream. He awoke and found it truth. I'm not quite sure I get that, I said. Does that mean that fiction is truer than truth? Aenea shook her head. No, I think he meant, well, in the same poem he has a hymn to Pan, dread opener of the mysterious doors leading to universal knowledge. Aenea blew on her cup of hot tea to cool it. To Father, Pan became a sort of symbol of imagination, especially romantic imagination. She sipped her tea. Did you know, Paul, that Pan was the allegorical precursor to Christ? I blinked. This was the same child who had been asking for ghost stories 2 nights ago. Christ? I said. I was enough a product of my time to flinch at any hint of blasphemy. Aenea drank her tea and looked at the moons. Her left arm was wrapped around her raised knees as she sat. Father thought that some people, not all, were moved by their response to nature to be stirred by that elemental, Pan-like imagination. Be still the unimaginable lodge, for solitary thinkings, such as dodge, conception to the very bourne of heaven. Then leave the naked brain, be still the leaven that spreading in this dull and clotted earth gives it a touch ethereal, a new birth. Be still a symbol of immensity, a firmament rejected in a sea, an element filling the space between, an unknown. We were all silent a moment after this recitation. I had grown up listening to poetry, Shepard's rough epics, the old poet's cantos, the garden epic of young Tycho and Glee and the centaur Raul, so I was used to rhymes under starry skies. Most of the poems I had heard and learned and loved were simpler to understand than this, however. After a moment, broken only by the lapping of waves against the raft and the wind against our tent, I said, So this was your father's idea of happiness? Aenea tossed her head back so that her hair moved in the wind. Oh, no, she said, just the first stage of happiness on his pleasure thermometer. There were 2 higher stages. What were they? Said A. Bettik. The android's soft voice almost made me jump. I had forgotten he was on the raft with us. Aenea closed her eyes and spoke again, her voice soft, musical, and free from the sing-song cant of those who ruin poetry. But there are richer entanglements far more self-destroying, leading by degrees, more self-destroying, leading by... Why does it repeat a line? I have no idea. That is baffling. I can't imagine the original poem does that. Let's try this again. But there are richer entanglements far more But there are richer entanglements far, more self-destroying, leading by degrees, is made of love and friendship, and sits high upon the forehead of humanity. Still not as bad as what happened in Armor like 3 times. But not great. Now I have to look that up, because I don't remember my... Give me a sec. I'm going to find the actual poem fragment. Because my Keats is very, very, very dim. I do not have a great knowledge of Keats's work. I have like a broad strokes understanding. It repeats a line twice. Actually, I can find that pretty easily. More self-destroying, leading by degrees. More self-destroy. It will be in Endymion poems. Yes. There's Hyperion, Endymion. Let's try. It's something about a crown, I think is the line. Richer entanglements far. Richer entanglements far. Here we go. So, from johnkeats.com, in the Endymion section, part 1, it reads, and she is admittedly editing a bit, and that's okay, but I don't think she added a line repeated twice.
But there are richer entanglements, enthrallments far more self-destroying, leading by degrees to the chief intensity. The crown of these is made of love and friendship, and sits high upon the forehead of humanity. So it for some reason in this edition of the book, they mangled the poem quote and removed the to the chief intensity, the crown of these. So my apologies for the digression. But I needed to do a sand check on that. It's kind of important.
There will be a quiz later.
But there are richer entanglements far more self-destroying, leading by degrees to the chief intensity. The crown of these is made of love and friendship, and it's high upon and sits high upon the forehead of humanity. I looked up at the dust storm and volcanic flashes on the giant moon. Sepia clouds moved across the orange and amber landscape up there. So those are his other levels? I said, a bit disappointed. First nature, then love, then friendship? Not exactly, said the girl. Father thought that true friendship between humans was on an even higher level than our response to nature, but that the highest level attainable was love. I nodded. Like the Church teaches, I said, the love of Christ, the love of our fellow humans. Said Aenea, sipping the last of her tea. Father meant erotic love. Sex. She closed her eyes again. Now I have tasted her sweet soul to the core. All other depths are shallow. Essences, once spiritual, are like muddy leaves, meant but to fertilize my earthly root, and make my branches lift the golden fruit into the bloom of heaven. I admit that I did not know what to say to that. I shook the last of the coffee out of my cup, cleared my throat, studied the hurtling moons and still visible Milky Way for a moment, and said, So, do you think he was onto something? As soon as I said it, I wanted to kick myself. This was a child I was talking to. She might spout old poetry, or old pornography for that matter, but there was no way she could understand it. Aenea looked at me. The moonlight made her large eyes luminous. I think there are more levels on heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in my father's philosophy. I see, I said, thinking, who the hell is Horatio? My father was very young when he wrote that, said Aenea. It was his first poem, and it was a flop. What he wanted his shepherd hero to learn was how exalted these things could be. Poetry, nature, wisdom, the voices of friends, brave deeds, the glory of strange places, the charm of the opposite sex. But he stopped before he got to the real essence. What real essence? I asked. Our raft rose and fell on the sea's breathing. The meaning of all motions, shapes, and sounds, whispered the girl, all forms and substances, straight homeward to their symbol essences. Why were those words so familiar? It took me a while to remember. Our raft sailed on through the night and sea of Mare Infinitus. At some point, it would probably behoove me to do a read aloud of Hyperion, the poem Hyperion and the poem Endymion. Maybe doing it beforehand would have been a good call. Ah, well. I'll think about it. Later date. We slept again before the suns rose, and after another breakfast I rose to sight in the weapons. Philosophical poetry by moonlight was all right, but guns that shot straight and true were a necessity. I hadn't had time to test the firearms aboard ship or after our crash on the jungle world, and carrying around unfired, unsighted weapons made me nervous. In my short time in the Home Guard and longer years as a hunting guide, I'd long since discovered that familiarity with a weapon was easily as important as, and probably more important than, having a fancy rifle. The largest of the moons was still in the sky as the suns rose. First the smaller of the binaries, a brilliant mote in the morning sky, palling the Milky Way to invisibility and dulling the details on the large moon, and then the primary, smaller than Hyperion's Sol-like sun, but very bright. Smaller than Hyperion's Sol-like sun, but very bright. The sky deepened to an ultramarine and then deepened further to a cobalt blue, with the two stars blazing and the orange moon filling the sky behind us. Sunlight made the moon's atmosphere a hazy disk and banished the surface features from our sight. Meanwhile, the day grew warm, then hot, then blazing. Oh, that's right. I wanted to switch covers real quick. Bear with me a moment as I hunt it down from inside my poorly organized folder. Yes, is this the one? Yes, I find it. Boom. Yet another one by Noriyoshi Orai. He has a bunch of them, and they are quite good. He even has one for the short story that is in the collection Worlds Enough and Time, which is actually a tie-in to this. It's sort of a distance kind of sequel, I guess. It's like a revisiting of the setting. It's not something we'll get to until we're done with this. Anyway, where were we? Yes. The sea came up a bit, easy swells turning into regular 2-meter waves that jostled the raft some, but were far enough apart to let us ride them without undue discomfort. As the guidebook had promised, the sea was a disturbing violet, serrated by wave-top crests of a blue so dark as to be almost black, and occasionally broken by yellow kelp beds or foam of an even darker violet. The craft continued toward the horizon where the moons and suns had risen. We thought of it as east, and we could only hope that the strong current was carrying us somewhere. When we doubted that the current was moving us at all, we trailed a line or tossed some bit of debris overboard and watched the difference between wind and current tug at it. Sorry. I don't know. My reading has been scuffed lately, so I apologize for that. The waves were moving from what we perceived as south to north. We continued east. I fired the .45 first, checking the magazine to make sure that the slugs were securely in place. I was afraid that the archaic quality of having ammunition separate from the structure of the magazine itself would make me forgetful of reloading at an awkward time. We did not have much to toss overboard for target practice, but I kept a few used ration containers at my feet, tossed one, and waited until it had floated about 15 meters away before firing. The automatic made an indecent roar when it went off. I knew that slug throwers were loud. I had fired some in basic training, since the Ice Claw rebels often used them, but this blast almost made me drop the pistol into the violet sea. It scared Aenea, who had been staring off to the south and musing over something, right to her feet, and even made the unflappable android jump. "Sorry," I said, and braced the heavy weapon with both hands and fired again. After using 2 clips worth of the precious ammunition, I was assured that I could hit something at 15 meters. Beyond that, well, I hoped that whatever I was shooting at had ears and would be spooked by the noise that .45 made. As I broke the weapon down after firing, I mentioned again that this ancient piece could have been Braun Lamia's. Aenea looked at it. "As I said, I never saw Mother with a handgun." "She could have lent it to the consul when he went back to the web in the ship," I said, cleaning the opened pistol. "No," said Bettik. I turned to look at him as he leaned against the steering oar. "No?" I said. "I saw M. Lamia's weapon when she was on the Benares," said the android. "It was an antiquated pistol, her father's, I believe, but it had a pearl handle, a laser sight, and was adapted to hold flechette cartridges." "Oh," I said. The idea had been appealing. "At least this thing's been well preserved and rebuilt," I said. "It must have been kept in some sort of stasis box. A 1,000-year-old handgun would not have worked otherwise. Or perhaps it was some sort of clever reproduction that the consul had picked up on his travels. It did not matter, of course, but I had always been struck by the sense of history, I guess you would call it, that old firearms seemed to emanate. I fired the flechette pistol next. It took only one burst to see that it worked quite nicely, thank you. The floating ration pack was blown into 1,000 flow foam shards from 30 meters away. The entire wave top jumped and shimmered as if a steel rain were pelting it. Flechette weapons were messy, hard to miss with, and eminently unfair to the target, which is why I had chosen this. I set the safety on and put it back in my pack. The plasma rifle was harder to sight in. The click-up optical sight allowed me to zero in on anything from the floating ration pack 30 meters away to the horizon 25 clicks or so away, but while I sank the ration pack in the first shot, it was hard to tell the effectiveness of the longer shots. There was nothing out there to shoot at. Theoretically, a pulse rifle could hit anything one could see. There was no allowance necessary for windage or ballistic arc, and I watched through the scope as the bolt kicked a hole in waves 20 clicks out, but it did not create the same confidence that firing at a distant target would have. I raised the rifle to the giant moon now setting behind us. Through the scope I could just make out a white-topped mountain there, probably frozen CO2 rather than snow, I knew, and, just for the hell of it, I squeezed off around. The plasma rifle was essentially silent compared to the semi-automatic slug-thrower pistol, only the usual cat's cough when it fired. The scope was not powerful enough to show a hit, and at those distances, rotations of the two worlds would be a problem. But I would be surprised if I had not hit the mountain. Home Guard barracks were full of stories of Swiss Guard riflemen who had knocked down ouster commandos after firing from thousands of clicks away on a neighboring asteroid or some such. The trick, as it had been for millennia, was seeing the enemy first. Thinking of that after firing the shotgun once, cleaning it, and setting away all the weapons, I said, "We need to do some scouting today." Do you doubt that the other portal will be there?" asked Aenea. I shrugged. The guide said 5 clicks between portals. We must have floated at least 100 since last night. Probably more. "Are we going to take the hawking mat out?" asked the girl. The suns were burning her fair skin. "I thought I'd use the flying belt," I said. Less radar profile if anyone's watching, I thought, but did not say aloud. "And you're not going, kiddo." I said I did say aloud. Just me. I pulled the belt from its place under the tent, cinched the harness tightly, pulled my plasma rifle out, and activated the hand controller. "Well, shit," I said. The belt did not even try to lift me. For a second I was sure that we were on a Hyperion-like world with lousy EM fields, but then I looked at the charge indicator. Red. Empty. Flat out. "Shit," I said again. I unbuckled the harness, and the 3 of us gathered around the useless thing as I checked the leads, the battery pack, and the flight unit. "It was charged right before we left the ship," I said. "The same time we charged the hawking mat." Bettik tried running a diagnostic program, but with 0 power, even that would not run. "Your comlog should have the same sub-program," said the android. "It does?" I said stupidly. "May I?" said Bettik, gesturing toward the comlog. I removed the bracelet and handed it to him. Bettik opened a tiny compartment I had not even noticed on the trinket, removed a bead-sized lead on a microfilament, and plugged into the belt. Lights blinked. "The flying belt is broken," announced the comlog in the ship's voice. "The battery pack is depleted approximately 27 hours prematurely. I believe it is a fault in the storage cells." "Great," I said. "Can it be fixed? Will it hold a charge if we find one?" "Not this battery unit," said the comlog, "but there are 3 replacements in the ship's EVA locker." "Great. Great," I said again. I lifted the belt with its bulky battery and harness and tossed it over the side of the raft. It sank beneath the violet waves without a trace. "All set here," said Aenea. She was sitting cross-legged on the hawking mat, which was floating 20 centimeters above the raft. "Want to look around with me?" I did not argue, but sat behind her on the mat, folded my legs, and watched her tap the flight threads. About 500 meters up, gasping for air and leaning out over the edge of our little carpet, things seemed a lot scarier than they had on the raft. The violet sea was very big, very empty, and our raft only a speck below, a tiny black rectangle on the reticulated violet and black sea. From this altitude, the waves that had seemed so serious on the raft were invisible. "I think I've found another level of that fellowship with essence response to nature that your father wrote about," I said. "What's that?" Aenea was shivering in the cold air of the jet stream. She had worn just the undershirt and vest she had been wearing on the raft. "Scared shitless," I said. Aenea laughed. I have to say here that I loved Aenea's laugh then, and I warm at the thought of it now. It was a soft laugh, but full and unself-conscious and melodic to the extreme. I miss it. "We should have let Bettik come up to scout instead of us," I said. "Why?" "From what he said about his high-altitude scouting before," I said, "evidently he doesn't need to breathe air, and he's impervious to little things like depressurization." Aenea leaned back against me. "He's not impervious to anything," she said softly. "They just designed his skin to be a little tougher than ours. It can act like a pressure suit for short periods, even in hard vacuum, and he can hold his breath a bit longer, that's all." I looked at her. "Do you know a lot about androids?" "No," said Aenea. "I just asked him." She scooted forward a bit and laid her hands on the control threads. We flew east. East is in quotes because they don't actually know for sure. I admit that I was terrified of the thought of losing contact with the raft, of flying around this ocean planet until these flight threads lost their charge and we plummeted to the sea, probably to be eaten by a lantern-mouthed leviathan. I'd programmed my inertial compass with the raft as a starting point, so unless I dropped the compass, which was unlikely because I now kept it on a lanyard around my neck, we would find our way back all right. But still, I worried. "Let's not go too far," I said. "All right." Aenea was keeping the speed down, about 60 or 70 clicks, I guessed, and had swooped back down to where we could breathe more easily and the air was not so cold. Below us, the violet sea stayed empty in a great circle to the horizon. "Your Farcasters seem to be playing tricks on us," I said. "Why do you call them my Farcasters, Raul?" "Well, you're the one they recognize." She did not answer. "Seriously," I said, "do you think there's some rhyme or reason to the worlds they're sending us to?" Aenea glanced over her shoulder at me. "Yes," she said, "I do." I waited. The deflection fields were minimal at this speed, so the wind tossed the girl's hair back toward my face. "Do you know much about the web?" she asked. "About Farcasters?" I shrugged, realized that she was not looking back at me now, and said aloud, "They were run by the AIs of the Technocore. According to both the Church and your Uncle Martin's cantos, the Farcasters were some sort of plot by the AIs to use human brain... Okay, let's try that again. The Farcasters were some sort of plot by the AIs to use human brains, neurons, as a sort of giant DNA computer thingy. They were parasites on us each time a human transited the Farcasters, right?" "Right," said Aenea. "So every time we go through one of these portals, the AIs, wherever they are hanging onto our brains like big, blood-filled ticks, right?" I said. "Wrong," said the girl. She swiveled toward me again. "Not all of the Farcasters were built or put there or maintained by the same elements of the core," she said. "Does Uncle Martin's finished cantos tell about the civil war in the core that my father discovered?" "Yeah," I said. I closed my eyes in an effort to remember the actual stanzas of the oral tale I'd learned. It was my turn to recite. "In the cantos, it's some sort of AI persona that the Keats hybrid talks to in the core megasphere of data space," I said. "Uman," says the girl. "That was the AI's name. My mother traveled there once with father, but it was my uncle, the second Keats hybrid, who had the final showdown with Uman. Go on." "Why," I said, "you must know the thing better than I do." "No," she said. "Uncle Martin hadn't gone back to work on the cantos when I knew him. He said he didn't want to finish it. Tell me how he described what said about the civil war in the core." I closed my eyes again. 2 centuries we brooded thus, and then the groups went their separate ways. Stables wishing to preserve the symbiosis, volatiles wishing to end humankind, ultimates deferring all choice until the next level of awareness is born. Level of awareness, even. Conflict raged then. True war wages now. "That was 270-some standard years ago for you," said Aenea. "That was right before the fall." "Yeah," I said, opening my eyes and searching the sea for anything other than violet waves. "Did Uncle Martin's poem explain the motivations of the stables, volatiles, and ultimates?" "More or less," I said. "It's hard to follow. The poem has and the other core AIs speaking in Zen koans." Aenea nodded. "That's about right." "According to the Cantos," I said, "the group of core AIs known as the Stables wanted to keep being parasites on our human brains when we used the web. The Volatiles wanted to wipe us out. And I guess the Ultimates didn't give much of a damn as long as they could keep working on the evolution of their own machine god. What did they call it?" "The UI," said Aenea, slowing the carpet and swooping lower. "The ultimate intelligence." "Yes," I said. "Pretty esoteric stuff. How does it relate to our going through these Farcaster portals, if we ever find another portal?" At that moment I doubted that we would. The world was too big, the ocean too large. Even if the current was bearing our little raft in the right direction, the odds that we would float within that 100-meter or so hoop of the next portal seemed too small to consider. "Not all of the Farcaster portals were built or maintained by the Stables to be, how did you put it, like big ticks on our brains." "All right," I said. "Who else built the Farcasters?" The River Tethys Farcasters were designed by the Ultimates," said Aenea. "They were an experiment, I guess you'd say, with the void which binds. That's the core phrase. Did Martin use it in his cantos?" "Yeah," I said. We were lower now, just 1,000 or so meters above the waves, but there was no sight of the raft or anything else. "Let's head back," I said. "All right." We consulted the compass and set our course home, if a leaky raft can be called home. "I never understood what the hell the void which binds was supposed to be," I said. "Some sort of hyperspace stuff that the Farcasters used and where the core was hiding while it preyed on us. I got that part. I thought it was destroyed when Mina Gladstone ordered bombs dropped into the Farcasters." "You can't destroy the void which binds," said Aenea, her voice remote, as if she were thinking about something else. "How did Martin describe it?" "Planck time and Planck length," I said. "I don't remember exactly. Something about combining the 3 fundamental constants of physics, gravity, Planck's constant, and the speed of light. I remember it gave some tiny little units of length and time." "About 10 to the 35th of a meter for the length," said the girl, accelerating the carpet a bit, "and 10 to the 43rd second for time." "That doesn't tell me much," I said. "It's just fucking small and short, pardon the language." "You're absolved," said the girl. We were gently gaining altitude. But it wasn't the time or length that was important. It was how they were woven into the void which binds. My father tried to explain it to me before I was born. I blinked at that phrase, but continued listening. "You know about the planetary data spheres?" "Yes," I said, and tapped the comlog. "This trinket says that Mare Infinitus doesn't have one." "Right," said Aenea, "but most of the web worlds used to. And from the data spheres, there was the megasphere." "The Farcaster medium, the void thing, linked data spheres, right?" I said. "Force and the hegemony electronic government, the all thing, they used the megasphere." "The Force and the hegemony electronic government, the all thing, they used the megasphere as well as the fat line to stay connected." Yup, said Aenea. The megasphere actually existed on a subplane of the fat line. I didn't know that, I said. The FTL medium had not existed in my lifetime. Do you remember what the last message on the fat line was before it went down during the fall? Asked the child. Yes, I said, closing my eyes. The lines of the poem did not come to me this time. The ending of the cantos had always been too vague to interest me enough to memorize all those stanzas, despite Grandham's drilling. Some cryptic message from the core, I said. Something about, get off the line and quit tying it up. The message, said Aenea, was, there will be no further misuse of this channel. If you are disturbing others who are using it to serious purpose. Access will be restored when you understand what it is for. Right, I said. That's in the cantos, I think. And then the hyperstring medium just quit working. The core sent that message and shut down the fat line. The core did not send that message, said Aenea. I remember the slow chill that spread through me then, despite the heat of the two suns. It didn't? I said stupidly. Who did? Good question, said the child. When my father talked about the metasphere, the wider datum plane that was somehow connected to or by the void which binds, he always used to say it was filled with lions and tigers and bears. Lions and tigers and bears, I repeated. Those were old Earth animals. I don't think that any of them made the Hedgera. I don't think any of them were still around to make the trip, not even their stored DNA, when old Earth crumbled into its black hole after the big mistake of '08. Said Aenea. I'd like to meet them someday. There we are. I looked over her shoulder. We were about 1,000 meters above the sea now, and the raft looked tiny but clearly visible. Bettik was standing, shirtless once again in the midday heat, at the steering oar. He waved a bare blue arm. We both waved back. I hope there's something good for lunch, said Aenea. If not, I said, we'll just have to stop at Gus's Oceanic Aquarium and Grill. Aenea laughed and set up our glide path to home. It was just after dark, and the moons had not risen when we saw the lights blinking on the eastern horizon. We rushed to the front of the raft and tried to make out what was there. We rushed to the front of the raft and tried to make out what was out there. Aenea using the binoculars, Bettik the night goggles on full amplification, and me with the rifle's scope. It's not the arch, said Aenea. It's a platform in the ocean. Big, on stilts of some sort. I do see the arch, however, said the android, who was looking several degrees north of the blinking light. The girl and I looked in that direction. The arch was just visible, a chord of negative space cutting into the Milky Way just above the horizon. The platform, with its blinking navigation beacons for aircraft and lamplit windows, was just... The platform, with its blinking navigation beacons for aircraft and lamplit windows just becoming visible, was several clicks closer. And between us and the Farcaster. Damn, I said. I wonder what it is. Gus's? Said Aenea. I sighed. Well, if it is, I think it's under new ownership. There's been a dearth of River Tethys tourists the last couple of centuries. I studied the large platform through the rifle scope. It has a lot of levels, I muttered. There are several ships tied up, fishing boats is my bet, and a pad for skimmers and other aircraft. I think I see a couple of thopters tied down there. What's a thopter? Asked the girl, lowering the binoculars. Bettik answered. A form of aircraft using movable wings, much like an insect, Aenea. They were quite popular during the hegemony, although unseen on Hyperion. I believe they were also called dragonflies. They're still called that, I said. The packs had a few on Hyperion. I saw one down on the Ursus ice shelf. Raising the scope again, I could see the eye-like blisters on the front of the dragonfly, illuminated by a lighted window. "They're thopters," I said. "It seems that we will have some trouble passing that platform to get to the arch undetected," said Bettik. "Quick," I said, turning away from the blinking lights. "Let's get the tent and mast down." We had re-rigged the tent to provide a sort of shelter/wall on the starboard side of the raft near the back. For purposes of privacy and sanitation that I won't go into here, but now we fumbled the microfiber down and folded it away into a packet the size of my palm. Bettik lowered the pole at the front. "The steering oar?" he said. I looked at it a second. "Leave it. It doesn't have much of a radar cross-section, and it's no higher than we are." Aenea was studying the platform again through the binoculars. "I don't think they can see us now," she said. "We're between these swells most of the time, but when we get closer—" "And when the moons rise," I added. Bettik sat near the hearth. "If we could just go around in a large arc to get to the portal." I scratched my cheek, hearing the stubble there. "Yeah, I thought of using the flying belt to tow us, but—" "We have the mat," said the girl, joining us near the heating cube. The low platform seemed empty without the tent above it. "How do we connect a tow line?" I said. "Burn a hole in the hawking mat?" "If we had a harness—" began the android. "We had a nice harness on the flying belt," I said. "I fed it to the lantern-mouth Leviathan." "We could rig another harness," continued Bettik, "and run the line to the person on the hawking mat." "Sure," I said, "but as soon as we're airborne, the mat offers a stronger radar return. If they land skimmers and thopters there, they almost certainly have some sort of traffic control, no matter how primitive." "We could stay low," said Aenea. "Keep the mat just above the waves, no higher than we are." "No higher than we are." I scratched at my chin. "We can do that," I said, "but if we make a big enough detour to stay out of the platform's sight, it'll be long after moonrise before we get to the portal. Hell, it will be if we head straight for it on this Yeah, okay. Oh my gosh, my brain is not keeping up. This is embarrassing. I scratched at my chin. "We can do that," I said, "but if we make a big enough detour to stay out of the platform's sight, it'll be long after moonrise before we get to the portal. Hell, it will be if we head straight for it on this current. They're bound to see us in that light. Besides, the portal's only a click or so from the platform. They're high enough that they'd see us as soon as we get that close." "We don't know that they're looking for us," said the girl. I nodded. The image of that priest-captain who had been waiting for us in Parvati System and Renaissance never left my mind for long. His Roman collar on that black Pax Fleet uniform. Part of me expected him to be on that platform, waiting with Pax troops. "It doesn't matter too much if they're looking for us," I said. "Even if they just come out to rescue us, do we have a cover story that makes sense?" Aenea smiled. "We went out for a moonlit cruise and got lost? You're right, Raul. They'd rescue us, and we'd spend the next year trying to explain who we are to the Pax authorities. They may not be looking for us, but you say they're on this world." "Yes," said Bettik. "The Pax has extensive interests on Mare Infinitus. From what we gleaned while hiding in the University City, it was clear that the Pax stepped in long ago to restore order here, to create sea-farming conglomerates, and to convert the survivors of the Fall to born-again Christianity. Mare Infinitus had been a protectorate of the hegemony. Now it is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Church." "Bad news," said Aenea. She looked from android to me. "Any ideas?" "I think so," I said, rising. We had been whispering all during the conversation, even though we were still at least 15 clicks from the platform. "Instead of guessing about who's out there or what they're up to, why don't I go take a look? Maybe it's just Gus's descendants and a few sleeping fishermen." Aenea made a rueful sound. "When we first saw the light, do you know what I thought it might be?" "What?" I said. "Uncle Martin's toilet." "I beg your pardon," said the android. Aenea tapped her knees with her palms. "Really? Mother said that back when Martin Silenus was a big-name hack writer during the web days, he had a multi-world home." I frowned. Grandam told me about those. Farcasters instead of doors between the rooms. One house with rooms on more than one world. "Dozens of worlds from Uncle Martin's house, if Mother was to be believed," said Aenea. "And he had a bathroom on Mare Infinitus. Nothing else. Just a floating dock with a toilet. Not even any walls or ceiling." I looked out at the ocean swells. "So much for oneness with nature," I said. I slapped my leg. "All right, I'm going before I lose my nerve." No one argued with me or offered to take my place. I might have been persuaded if they had. I changed into darker trousers and my darkest sweater, pulling my drab hunting vest over the sweater, feeling a little melodramatic as I did so. "Commando boy goes to war," I muttered the cynical part of my brain. I told it to shut up. I kept on the belt with the pistol, added 3 detonators and a wad of plastic explosive from the flare pack to my belt pouch, slipped the night goggles over my head so they could hang unobtrusively within my vest collar when I wasn't wearing them, and set one of the comm unit earphones in my ear with the pickup mic pressed to my throat for sub-vocals. We tested the unit, Aenea wearing the other headset. I took the comm-log off and handed it to Bettik. "This thing catches the starlight too easily," I said, "and the ship's voice might start squawking stellar navigation trivia at a bad time." The android nodded and set the bracelet in his shirt pocket. "Do you have a plan, Endymion?" "I'll make one up when I get there," I said, raising the hawking mat just above the level of the raft. I touched Aenea's shoulder, the contact suddenly feeling like an electric jolt. I had noticed that effect before when our hands touched. Not a sexual thing, of course, but electrical nonetheless. "You stay low, kiddo," I whispered to her. "I'll holler if I need help." Her eyes were serious in the brilliant starlight. "It won't help, Raul. We can't get to you." "I know. I was just kidding." "Don't kid," she whispered. "Remember, if you're not with me on the raft when it goes through the portal, you'll be left behind here." I nodded, but the thought sobered me more than the thought of getting shot had. "I'll be back," I whispered. "It looks to me like this current will take us by the platform in... What do you think, Bettik?" "About an hour, Endymion." "Yeah, that's what I think, too. The damn moon should be coming up about then. I'll think of something to distract them." Patting Aenea's shoulder again, nodding to Bettik, I took the mat out over the water. Even with the incredible starlight and the night vision goggles, it was difficult piloting the hawking mat for those few clicks to the platform. I had to keep between the ocean swells whenever possible, which meant that I was trying to fly lower than the wave tops. It was delicate work. I had no idea what would happen if I cut the tops of one of those long, slow swells. Perhaps nothing, perhaps the hawking mat's flight threads would just short out. But I also had no intention of finding out. The platform seemed huge as I approached. After seeing nothing but the raft for 2 days on this sea, the platform was huge. Some steel, but mostly dark wood from the looks of it, a score of pylons holding it 15 meters or so above the waves. That gave me an idea of what the storms must be like on this sea, and made me feel all the luckier that we hadn't encountered one. And the platform itself was multi-tiered. Decks and docks lower down where at least 5 long fishing boats bobbed, stairways, lighted compartments beneath what looked like the main deck level, 2 towers that I could see, one of them with a small radar dish, and 3 aircraft landing pads, 2 of which had been invisible from the raft. There were at least half a dozen thopters that I could see now, their dragonfly wings tied down, and 2 larger skimmers on the circular pad near the radar tower. I had figured out a perfect plan while flying the mat over here: create a diversion. The reason I had thought of the detonators and plastique, small explosives but capable of starting a fire at least, steal one of the dragonflies and either fly through the portal with it if we were being pursued, or just use it to drag the raft through at high speed. It was a good plan except for one flaw. I had no idea how to fly a thopter. That never happened in the holodramas I'd watched in Port Romance theaters or in the Home Guard rec rooms. The heroes in those things could fly anything they could steal: skimmers, EMVs, thopters, copters, rigid airships, spaceships. Evidently, I had missed hero basic training. If I managed to get into one of those things, I'd probably still be chewing my thumbnail and staring at the controls when the PAX guards grabbed me. It must have been easier being a hero back during hegemony days. The machines were smarter then, which made up for hero stupidity. As it was, although I would hate to admit it to my traveling companions, there weren't many vehicles that I could drive. A barge, a basic ground car, if it was one of those truck models the Hyperion Home Guard had used. As for piloting something myself, well, I had been glad when the spaceship hadn't had a control room. I shook myself out of this reverie on my heroic shortcomings and concentrated on closing the last few hundred meters to the platform. I could see the lights quite clearly now: aircraft beacons on the towers near the landing decks, a flashing green light on each of the ship docks, and lighted windows. Lots of windows. I decided to try to land on the darkest part of the platform, directly under the radar tower on the east side, and took the mat around in a long, slow, wave-hugging arc to approach from that direction. Looking back over my shoulder, I half expected to see the raft closing on me, but it was still invisible out toward the horizon. I hope it's invisible to these guys. I could hear voices and laughter now. Men's voices, deep laughter. It sounded like a lot of the off-world hunters I'd guided, filled with booze and bonhomie. But it also sounded like the dolts I'd served with in the guard. I concentrated on keeping the mat low and dry and sneaking up on the platform. "I'm about there," I subvocalized on the comlink. "Okay," was Aenea's whispered reply in my ear. We'd agreed that she would only reply to my calls unless there were an emergency on their end. Hovering, I saw a maze of beams, girders, subdecks, and catwalks under the main platform on this side. Unlike the well-lighted stairs on the north and west side, these were dark. Inspection catwalks, maybe, and I chose the lowest and darkest of them to land the carpet on. I killed the flight threads, rolled the little rug up, and lashed it in place where 2 beams met, cutting the cord I'd brought with a sweep of my knife. Setting the blade back in its sheath and tugging my vest over it, I had the sudden image of having to stab someone with that knife. The thought made me shudder. Except for the accident when M. Herrig attacked me, I had never killed anyone in hand-to-hand combat. I prayed to God I would never have to again. The stairs made noises under my soft boots, but I hoped the occasional squeak wouldn't be heard over the sound of the waves against the pylons and the laughter from above. I crept up 2 flights of stairs, found a ladder, and followed it up to a trap door. It was not locked. I slowly raised it, half expecting to tumble an armed guard on his ass. Raising my head slowly, I saw that this was part of the flight deck on the seaward side of the tower. 10 meters above, I could see the turning radar antenna slicing darkness out of the brilliant Milky Way with each revolution. I pulled myself to the deck, defeated the urge to tiptoe, and walked to the corner of the tower. 2 huge skimmers were tied down to the flight deck here, but they looked dark and empty. On the lower flight decks, I could see starlight on the multiple insect wings of the thopters. The light from our galaxy gleamed in their dark observation blisters. The flesh between my shoulder blades was crawling with the sense of being observed as I walked out on the upper deck, applied plastic explosive to the belly of the closest skimmer, set a detonator in place, which I could trigger with the appropriate frequency code from my comm unit, went down the ladder to the closest thopter deck, and did the same there. I was sure that I was being observed from one of the lighted windows or ports on this side, but no outcry went up. As casually as I could, I went soundlessly up the catwalk from the lower thopter deck and peered around the corner of the tower. Another stairway led down from the tower module to one of the main levels. The windows were very bright there and covered only with screens now, their storm shields up. I could hear more laughter, some singing, and the sound of pots and pans. Taking a breath, I moved down the stairs and across the catwalk, following another catwalk to keep me away from the doorway. Ducking under lighted windows, I tried to catch my breath and slow my pounding heart. If someone came out of that first doorway now, they would be between me and the way back to the hawking mat. I touched the grip of the .45 under my vest and the flap of the holster and tried to think brave thoughts. Mostly I was thinking about wanting to be back on the raft. I had planted the diversion explosives. What else did I want? I realized that I was more than curious. If these were not Pax troops, I did not want to set off the plastique. The rebels I had signed up to fight on the Ice Claw shelf had used bombs as their weapon of choice. Bombs in the villages, bombs in home guard barracks, masses of explosives in snowmobiles and small ships targeted against civilians as well as guard troops. And I had always considered this cowardly and detestable. Bombs were totally non-discriminating weapons, killing the innocent as surely as the enemy soldier. It was silly to moralize this way, I knew, but even though I hoped that the small charges would do no more than set empty aircraft ablaze, I was not going to detonate those charges unless I absolutely had to. These men, and women probably, and perhaps children, had done nothing to us. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, absurdly slowly, I raised my head and peered in the closest window. One glimpse and I ducked down out of sight. The pots and pans noises were coming from a well-lighted kitchen area. Galley, I corrected myself, since this was a ship, sort of. At any rate, there had been half a dozen people there, all men, all of military age, but not in uniform except for undershirts and aprons, cleaning, stacking, and washing dishes. Obviously, I'd come too late for dinner. Staying next to the wall, I duck-walked the length of this catwalk, slid down another stairway, and stopped at a longer bank of windows. Here, in the shadows of a corner where two modules came together, I could see in some of the windows along this west-facing wall without lifting my face to one. It was a mess hall, or a dining room of some sort. About 30 men, all men, were sitting over cups of coffee. Some were smoking recom cigarettes. At least one man appeared to be drinking whiskey, or at least amber fluid from a bottle. I would not have minded some of whatever it was. Recom cigarettes, I believe, is like recombinant cigarettes. It's RECOM as in Mary hyphen cigarettes. Just fancy future terms to let you know that you are in the future. Many of the men were in khaki, but I couldn't tell if this was some sort of local uniform or just the traditional garb of sports fishermen. I didn't see any Pax uniforms, which was definitely good. Perhaps this was just a fishing platform now, a hotel for rich off-world jerks who didn't mind paying years of time debt, or having their friends and families back home pay it, actually, for the thrill of killing something big or exotic. Hell, I might know some of those guys. Fishermen now, duck hunters when they visited Hyperion. I did not want to go in to find out. Feeling more confident now, I moved down the long walkway, the light from the windows falling on me. There did not seem to be any guards. No sentries. Maybe we would not need a diversion. Just sail the raft right past these guys, moonlight or no moonlight. They'd be sleeping, or drinking and laughing, and we'd just follow the current right into the Farcaster Portal that I could see less than 2 clicks to the northeast now, the faintest of dark arches against that starry sky. When we got to the portal, I would send a prearranged frequency shift that would not detonate the plastique I'd hidden, but would disarm the detonators. I was looking at the portal when I moved around the corner and literally bumped into a man leaning against the wall there. There were 2 others standing at the railing. One of them was holding night vision binoculars and looking off to the north. Both of the men at the railing had weapons. "Aye!" yelled the man I'd bumped into. "Sorry," I said. I definitely had never seen this scene in a holodrama. The 2 men at the railing were carrying flechette miniguns on slings and were resting their forearms on them with that casual arrogance that military types had practiced for countless centuries. Now, one of these 2 shifted the gun so that its barrel was aimed in my direction. The man I bumped into had been in the process of lighting a cigarette. Now he shook out the match flame, removed the lighted cigarette from his mouth, and glared at me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. The man was younger than I, perhaps early 20s standard, and I could see now that he was wearing a variation on the Pax Ground Forces uniform with the lieutenant's bar I'd learned to salute on Hyperion. His dialect was pronounced, but I couldn't place it. "Getting some air," I said lamely. Part of me was thinking that a real hero would have had his pistol out, blazing away. The smartest part of me did not even consider it. The other Pax trooper also shifted the sling of his flechette auto. I heard the click of a safety. "You all with the Klingman group?" he asked in the same thick dialect. "All the orders." "Or they orders?" I heard, "Or they otters." Outers. I didn't know if he was saying others or otters or perhaps authors. Maybe this was a seaborne concentration camp for bad writers. Maybe I was trying too hard to be mentally flippant when my heart was pounding so fiercely that I was afraid I was going to have a heart attack right in front of these 2. "Klingman," I said, trying to be as terse as possible. Whatever dialect I should have, I was sure I did not. The Pax lieutenant jerked a thumb toward the doorway beyond him. "You know the rules. Curfew after dark." "You know the rules. Curfew after dark." It is, he spells it out phonetically after the initial quotation as YEWENKNAWDEYRUES. Period. CUFUEAFFADOK. Period. "You know they rules. Curfew after dark." I nodded, trying to look contrite. My overvest was hanging down over the top of the holster on my hip. Perhaps they hadn't seen the pistol. "Comb," said the lieutenant, jerking his thumb again, but turning to lead the way. Comb. C-O-M-B! Exclamation point. The 2 enlisted types still had their hands on the flechette guns. At that distance, if they fired, there wouldn't be enough of me left intact to bury in a boot. I followed the lieutenant down the catwalk, through the door, and into the brightest and most crowded room I had ever entered. "God dang new-fangled future lingo." I think it's sort of like, I'm dancing around it. I had something settled in my head the last time I read this, but I can't remember what I settled on. I think it was going to be like,
Yar, pirate slang, but with a bit of a sort of Australian tang.
but I forgot to do it when it was important, so maybe I'll make it
Maybe I'll make it be a bit of a pirate type of burr or whatever. Pirate lingo, yar.
I don't know. Something to indicate they're on a water world.
Either that or we'll go like totally surfer, dude. I don't know, it's Mari Infinitis, brah. Got these sick waves, brah, and Mari Infinitis.
Anyway.
What, you don't like it, brah? Ah, it's too bad, bro. Gnarly waves.
Anyway, that will do it for this week. No, not this week, for today. Sorry. Let's see. When am I next free? I believe it is Wednesday. I should be free. Let's see here. Yes, tentatively Wednesday, Thursday. We should be free. Is the game plan for now. I will write that down in the Discord. I don't think I did that yet. Generally shooting for the same time of 12 noon U.S. East Coast time, which I realize is not ideal for anyone, but that's life. Anything else salient? If for some reason anyone's tuning in from Twitch and doesn't know and wants to catch up on older stuff I've done, feel free to check out the YouTube channel that I should have linked in there. You can get at the playlists, which I generally update at the top of the month, give or take. And you can do it there. You can check out what I've got there. It is a long laundry list of different books, different... I have a couple basic different playlist schemas. I've got playlists per book, which I usually condense to be a playlist per, like, trilogy or series. I have not always done that. I should probably go back and double check which ones I haven't done that on and do it for those. And then I have playlists that are kind of like, here's the general playlist for everything I do in a year. Or in the case of like my first several years, everything I did for my first several years. So there's a lot in that one. I should probably divvy up that one by year as well. That would be easier. Anyway, that about does it. So yeah, I will see folks Wednesday, Thursday. Appreciate you too, Severo. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully people have fun. I know I do. This is a fun romp of a book. It's a good time. Its biggest difficulty is that Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion are an incredibly tough act to follow. It's still very good. It's a very different experience. It's kind of like if you made... Yeah, it's a road trip. It's a road trip book, which is good. It's fun. It does it well. With difficulty, it stands alone. Jim Burke 7457 from YouTube. With difficulty, I think it does actually stand on its own pretty well. It does a good job of filling in like all the past detail you need to know. There will be nods. There will be most of the actual story that's happening is all stuff that's going to be new, and it's going to be telling you things. Hey, by the way, this thing that you thought you knew from the previous book is not actually the way things are. It's something else. So it goes pretty well on its own. I think you get maybe more appreciation from the nods and references if you have, but it is not absolutely mandatory because it does tell you basically everything you need to know. Although sometimes it'll be rather short about it, where it'll be like, oh, well, there's these cruciform things. They do stuff. They bring you back to life, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, that has a lot of baggage, actually, if you've read Hyperion and know the tale of the Bikura with Father Paul Duray. And some of that baggage explains why Raul Endymion doesn't have one. In addition to him kind of like not wanting to be beholden to the church. I do recommend Hyperion and The Fall of Hyperion. They are both very, very... the Hyperion cantos are phenomenal. I highly recommend them. In some ways, I actually recommend them better than Endymion. But Endymion is still very good. It's a very fun adventure novel. Series. Duology? Duology. Yes. Unlike, say, the culture novels by Ian M. Banks, where you don't have to read any of them in any order. You can read them in whatever order you want to. This one is a little more reliant. It's more about there's just a bunch of historical baggage, and you'll be caught up to speed if you've read that and you remember that. But Endymion does a good job of being like, oh, well, there's this stuff. It won't really explain, like, much about the character of Mina Gladstone, which they've referenced here as being leader of the Commonwealth, leader of the hegemony, Hegera. It won't explain much about her. This book won't explain much about her because this isn't her story, but she is fairly prevalent in Hyperion and the fall of Hyperion, and that will explain, oh yeah, this is this person, so this person they're referring to has a backstory, sort of thing. Anyway, with that, I'm going to run. I will see you all, what did I say? Wednesday, Thursday? Or was it Tuesday, Wednesday? Wednesday, Thursday. Wednesday, Thursday, tentatively. Should be a lock, unless a crisis emerges. Monday may or may not have been possible. I don't think it will. I don't think it'll happen Monday. If it does, I'll make a mention of it. I think I forgot to write a love note about today in the Discord. And if I did, I am sorry. I wasn't sure that I was going to have today until fairly close to the last minute. Let me check. I'll get it written up now. Oh yes, no, I did mention it at least, so that's something. I'll probably set up like a channel for like just dates or something. I don't know. I'll figure something out. I've got to also go and change the channel descriptions in both YouTube and Twitch to make sure that they reflect that I'm no longer on a strict Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. I'll try and get to that either today or later this week, if I remember, which I probably won't. But we'll see. I am but human. Anything else salient? I guess I can talk that I am reading a book right now entitled... Oh, who's that one by, though? I can't read it.
Can't read the title.
I know the title. I can't read the author name. I'm reading a book entitled The Buffalo Hunter, which is kind of a Native American / not quite Old West horror story. It's pretty good. I recommend. I'm not through it yet. I won't recommend it until I'm through it. It might completely crash and burn towards the end and just implode. But at least it didn't crash and burn and implode early, like some books I've read in recent years. I'll never forgive the book Free Chocolate for just squandering its premise. I've harped on about that one. Not at great length, but at enough length that nobody wants to hear me talk about it again. What I haven't harped on about was a book called Battle of the Linguist Mages, which just kind of felt like it was written by committee or something. It was very weird. And very, very unfortunate. Kind of cringeworthy. Like, I was reading, I'm like, the initial premise of this sounded good, and then, like, we got into the actual book, and, yeah, not so much, actually. That didn't work for me. Fortunately, though, most of my reading of relatively new fiction from, like, the last year, 3 years, that I've read in the last 365 days has mostly been quite good. So, there is still good stuff out there, and whatever metrics I use to acquire new books that I know little about has mostly worked out for me, which is nice. Anyway, with that, I'm going to leave you all to it. Stay safe, stay sane, be toasty or cool as your geolocation or personal preference permit, and be decent to each other. I will see you all later. Toodaloo.